it drives you crazy, getting old. We can talk it so good, we can make it so divine. We can talk it good, how you wish it would be all the time. The drink you spill all over me, lovers spit left on repeat. Mom and dad let me stay home, it drives you crazy getting home. The drink you spill all over me, lovers spit left on repeat. Mom and dad let me stay home, it drives you crazy getting home. This dream isn't feeling sweet. We're reeling through the midnight streets, and I've never felt more alone. It feels so scary getting old. We can talk it so good, we can make it so divine. We can talk it good, how you wish it would be all the time. This dream isn't feeling sweet, we're reeling through the midnight streets, and I've never felt more alone. Feels so scary getting old. This dream isn't feeling sweet, we're reeling through the midnight streets, and I've never felt more alone. Feels so scary getting old.
slow, thinkers all small, take a back seat or play their role. Dance with me and shake your bones. Slow down, it's a science. It's been waiting. Bring you down, snake eye with a sly smile. Can hold you and shake you, child. Leopards lays ease on plush pillows, slender caves of raiding chrome, paperback dreams in their deep toes, twitch their toes to black mammo. Slow down, it's a science. He's been waiting to bring you down. Snake eye, the sly smile. He can hold you and shake you, child.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute. If you could take your seats. If you haven't gotten coffee and pastries yet, now's your last chance. It's not your last chance. You can feel free to avail yourself of the coffee and pastries whenever you'd like. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming so early on a Monday morning to what I'm sure is going to be an interesting panel, and it'll be worth your while. I appreciate it. My name is Rajjo. I'm co-director of New America's Cybersecurity Initiative and senior counsel here at New America's Open Technology Institute. I wear two hats. Couple of housekeeping notes before we get truly started. If you need the bathrooms, they're out the door down to this hallway, and then take a left. They're right there. These doors slide. They don't push open and closed. I will see some of you will still try to push them open and closed, even though I've told you that, I guarantee it. A couple other notes. The Wi-Fi, if you need it, it's New America Guest 2 and 5. Choose whichever one that works for you. And the password is New America Guests, all one word and lowercase. Also, if you're here today, you may be interested in an event that we're doing tomorrow with ASPI. The Asia Pacific Maturity Model is being released, and that will be right here again in this room at 8:30. So if you thought you were getting here early today, you can try to show up even earlier tomorrow. So as I said, my name is Ross Schulman. I'm co-director of New America's Cybersecurity Initiative. My fellow co-director, Ian Wallace, sends his regards. He apologizes for being unable to join us today. If I'm looking at the clock, he is about 12 hours into an 18-hour flight on his way to New Delhi, India for the Sci-Fi conference. I think he'd probably rather be here than on a plane at this point. But our far-flung co-directors today actually provide an interesting segue or intro to today's event, if nothing else. And that is to say that cybersecurity is international. It is actually perhaps uniquely international. The confluence of jurisdictional, criminal, economic, national security, trade, and human rights implications that cross borders on a daily basis in the cybersecurity realm is sort of staggering when you think about it. It is uniquely a problem that no one government can solve. And we're here today because of that confluence, essentially, and to hear from sort of the breadth of stakeholders about how we're trying to address its impacts, even just within our own hemisphere, let alone sort of as a global problem. Thankfully, the governments of our region are sort of working on that problem, right? In July in Mexico City, the United States, Canada, and and Mexico, the governments thereof, doubled down on, reaffirmed the importance of sort of collaboration on these problems. And New America's Cybersecurity Initiative has worked with the U.S. Department of Commerce and Homeland Security, the Public Safety and Innovation, Science and Economic Development of Canada, and the Mexican Federal Police and the Mexican Ministry of the Economy to pull together today's program to talk about these issues. I hope you're all as excited as I am to sort of learn a little bit about the opportunities for growth and development in these areas today. To start off, I hope you'll join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Deputy Secretary of Commerce Bruce Andrews. Deputy Secretary is a veteran of the Department of Commerce, as well as the Senate Commerce Committee and private industry, and he uniquely understands the economic challenges that we're facing due to the cybersecurity crisis that we're looking at right now, and I, for one, look forward to hearing his thoughts. So please join me in welcoming Deputy Secretary.
Well, good morning, everyone. And yeah, I have to admit, I would much rather be here than on a 18-hour plane ride to India as well. And thank you, Ross, for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here today at the New America Foundation. New America is really known for bringing fresh perspectives to important issues, including cybersecurity. And I want to thank New America for hosting today's event. I also want to welcome our guests who traveled quite a distance to take part in this discussion. We're fortunate to be joined by government officials as well as business leaders from Canada and Mexico. As many of you know, today's summit actually grew out of the North American Leaders Summit that was held last June. President Obama, President Peña Nieto, and Prime Minister Trudeau recognized the importance of addressing cybersecurity collectively. Fundamentally, we're all here today with a simple goal: to start a dialogue between our three governments and our business communities on cybersecurity threats, practices, and priorities. From social media to cloud computing, the digital economy is no longer just an abstract concept. In the United States, in Canada, and Mexico, it is an everyday reality. As we speak, companies are developing revolutionary new technologies in areas like autonomous vehicles and digital manufacturing. And globally, more and more of our trade relationships are being defined by the data that we share across borders. In our increasingly interconnected economy, a startup in Silicon Valley may hire a team of programmers in Toronto to serve a manufacturing client in Mexico. As digital commerce goes global, the opportunities for innovation, collaboration, and economic growth are virtually limitless. As we read in newspapers every day, with new technologies come new opportunities for cyber criminals, terrorists, and foreign governments who exploit weaknesses in our digital infrastructure. In the private sector, cyber attacks can devastate businesses by leaking sensitive customer information, stealing intellectual property, or devastating equipment with malicious software. As governments, we too face unique challenges in defending our nations from constantly evolving cyber threats. In the United States, the vast majority of our critical infrastructure, from our power grids to our telecommunication networks, is owned by private industry. That is why, at the Department of Commerce, we believe that securing the digital economy demands close and constant cooperation between industry and government. Our department has a unique role to play in fostering this critical collaboration. We not only serve as the voice of business in the U.S. federal government, we are the government's digital economy agency. Our National Telecommunications and Information Administration advises the President on far-reaching internet policy issues, from privacy protection to governance to global internet freedom. And at the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, or NIST, experts work with industry to improve our cybersecurity posture. For example, we worked with business leaders to develop the cybersecurity framework, a common language for managing cyber risk that is increasingly being used around the world. We created the National Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, which works to solve technical challenges from securing network-enabled medical devices to better protecting the financial data sector. And we established the National Initiative for Cyber Education, which focuses on training more Americans in cybersecurity skills. We know that by working hard together, businesses and governments can help prevent devastating cyber attacks from undermining our economies. Yet we must also look beyond our own borders to strengthen our cybersecurity. In today's digital economy, international cooperation belongs online as well as offline. We must work together to overcome the unique threats of the digital age, and that is what brings us all here today. For months, representatives of the U.S. Department of Commerce, Homeland Security, and State have spoken with their government counterparts from Mexico and Canada about how to improve cooperation with industry around cybersecurity. Very early on, we agreed that this discussion had to engage the business communities across our continent, not just the policy experts in our governments. In the 21st century global economy, cybersecurity threats know no borders. Hackers, hostile governments, and criminal rings are constantly changing tactics and looking for ways to inflict new harms on businesses, our economies, and our peoples. That's why the cybersecurity framework, developed by industry and government together to transcend borders and harness innovation, is such an important resource to make progress trilaterally. Today's event gives us an opportunity to have an open and candid conversation about common threats and common challenges. But I urge you not to think of this event as a one-off occasion. It must be viewed as the start of a new ongoing dialogue on one of the greatest security challenges of our time. I thank you all for being here today and look forward to hearing about the takeaways from this event. This is an important conversation, one that we must keep going beyond today and well into the future. Thank you.
All right, good morning. My name's Rob Morgus. I'm a policy analyst with New America's Cybersecurity Initiative, not the Open Technology Institute. If I could invite the panelists for the first panel to come on up, that would be terrific. And while they do that, I'll remind everyone out there in the audience or following online that we are tweeting using the hashtag NACW. So if you're tweeting the event, feel free to do that or follow along. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and thank you to Deputy Secretary Andrews for his opening remarks. We're ecstatic to be hosting this important event in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Commerce, Homeland Security, Public Safety Canada, and the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada, the Mexican Federal Police, and the Mexican Ministry of Economy. These governments have agreed to create a process to engage promoting cybersecurity practices throughout the commercial sector that can apply across boundaries. The discussions today are designed to encourage opportunities for North American leadership to engage in ways across industry sectors and government bodies. In this first panel, which I'll introduce here in a second, we will be talking about cybersecurity incident response, in particular how, given the transnational nature of many cybersecurity incidents, these three governments collaborate and the way that government bodies can assist and collaborate with the private sector as well. We're a bit limited on time. We're looking at about 45 minutes. We're going to spend about 25 of those minutes in a discussion here, and then we want to make this collaborative and open to audience participation as well. So we'll have a discussion with you all, question and answers for about 20 minutes at the end. We're going to try to cover some of the most pressing issues as we see them, paint a picture of how public-private cybersecurity incident response could work. We'll explore questions like, what is a CERT or a CSERT? What happens when you in the commercial sector share incident information with a national CERT? And when should industry look to collaborate with or contact a national CERT? I'm joined by an outstanding panel this morning. We have Adam Hatfield from the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center, or CCIRC. Next to him is Brad Nix from CERT, or US CERT, followed by Chris Boyers from AT&T, Catherine Condello of CenturyLink, and Arturo Gomez down on the end there of CERT MX. I'm going to start I'm going to kick things off by asking the panelists to quickly introduce themselves and give a quick overview of what your organization's role is in the private-public partnership around cybersecurity incident response. If you can limit your answers to about 1 to 2 minutes, that would be great. Adam, keep you.
Thank you very much.
Should be good.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm delighted to be on this panel with a lot of my very close colleagues and partners. As was stated, I represent Public Safety Canada's Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center, or CSIRC. And quite simply, what we are and what we are there to do is we are there to help. If you are in cyberspace, if you use a computer, and by the way, that's all of you, whether or not you know it, at some point in your life, you're going to trip and stumble and fall on the information superhighway, and you're going to need some help. And that is what we are there to do. We are a source of authoritative guidance on cyber events for critical infrastructure, the private sector, and in our case in Canada, non-federal government organizations, so provinces, territories, municipalities, private companies, critical infrastructure, electrical grid, financial institutions. We work with all of them. And what we are there to do, quite simply, is to help prepare for, prevent, respond to, and recover from cyber incidents. We are an operational shop. We have a lot of visibility into what's happening, and when you contact us and say, hey, I saw this and it looks weird, we can say, yep, it is weird. We've seen it before. Here's what you might be able to do about it. We are not law enforcement. We are a civilian organization, although we work very closely with all of our federal partners and our international partners. But at the end of the day, our job is to help you make sure that cyber incidents don't impact your organization and your business.
We'll dig into some of that in a bit. Thanks, Adam. Brad?
So with limited time to do the introduction and being somebody that's full of a lot of hot air, I'll start just by saying everything that Adam said we're doing as well. That's also a pretty big part of our mission space at US CERT and DHS. In addition to the stuff that Adam mentioned, we've also have a fairly unique responsibility within CERTs in that we provide cybersecurity protection to our federal civilian executive branch agencies through some intrusion detection and intrusion prevention capabilities. And that actually tends to be the more substantial part of where we spend our time and money. We have sensors on all of our executive branch department and agency networks, and we actually leverage the sensors and the information in those sensors to try to isolate and identify malicious activity, and then look across our U.S. government enterprise network, for all intents and purposes, for similar activity across the United States government. Our sensor network constitutes, I believe, at last check, it was somewhere around 14 to 15 trillion net flow conversations a day. So that's a lot of traffic, which is why that tends to be a pretty big part of what we do. The other thing that I'll also mention is our collaboration responsibilities. So in addition to the collaborating and the responding that we will provide to private industry and state and local, territorial and tribal governments, we will also work with foreign governments and international entities to ensure that we are developing the right relationships with those other CERT organizations to share information, and to also basically, recognizing the fact that the internet is an international entity, try to ensure that we can leverage our common knowledge to help ferret out common attacks against our infrastructures.
Thanks, Brad. Chris?
Yes, so my name is Chris Boyer. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm Assistant Vice President for Global Public Policy for AT&T. Handle cybersecurity policy issues for the company. Hopefully folks have heard of AT&T, so I'll skip over the introduction. In terms of this particular topic, there's a couple of relevant areas. I'm currently the chair of the FCC's CISRIC Working Group 5 on strategic information sharing within the communications sector, and also chairing an information sharing committee within the Sector Coordinating Council, and work very closely with Catherine and others here in the sector on information sharing issues. So hopefully I can offer some advice today in terms of what the sector's doing in strategic information sharing. From an AT&T perspective, we work closely with a variety of government agencies, but also with extensively in the private sector, which is an area I'd like to talk a little bit about today because some of that gets lost in the conversation. But a lot of the information sharing that's going on right now that's most relevant on cybersecurity is actually with our private sector partners. But I'll talk through a little bit of what we're doing today in terms of partnering with governments. And one last little known fact about AT&T is that we recently acquired a business in Mexico, and we're actually one of the larger mobile operators in Mexico at this point in time. So I'm also looking at how we can contribute some of that within North America, which I think is the topic of this particular venue today. So thank you.
Good morning. Again, thank you for inviting me. Catherine Condella with CenturyLink. I'm Director of National Security Emergency Preparedness, and because AT&T is a little bit larger than my company, not that much, still, I sort of play a number of various roles, in particular with government. I do handle the policy element within this area for CenturyLink, and I'm the liaison between the federal government and CenturyLink for those issues. But in the context of today, I'm going to be really focusing on the operational role that I have. CenturyLink is embedded within DHS's National Coordinating Center, which is one of the operational components of the NKIC. And we have had that relationship with government for over 35 years. We're there to be able to support emergency response, whether it's fire, flood, famine, or cyber incidents. So today, hopefully, I'll be able to talk a little bit about, on an operational level, the work that we're doing to, one, revise the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, and then, as Chris intimated, talk about some of the operational issues that we're doing with our fellow peers to be able to address cyber issues.
Thanks, Catherine. Arturo?
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here. My name is Arturo Gomez. I'm coming from the Mexican Federal Police, or Policía Federal Mexicana. Well, in this case, the Mexican Federal Police is it's a large police in Mexico, and we have several divisions. In these divisions, usually we try to fight the crime in the several manifestations. And this kind of manifestation that we are seeing is the cybercrime. And regarding cybercrime, we have a special branch. This is the scientific division. So this is an effort since the 2010 to try to be more effective to deal with this type of threats and attacks we are seeing. And we have specifically for this, we have a CERT. The CERT is a computer information response team. It's called the CERT-MX. And the CERT-MX is in charge, in the first place, primarily is in charge to protect the critical digital infrastructures in the country. This is in the first place. And the second place, we're looking forward to the regular citizens and the public and private sectors. And in this case, we have, we are the first point of connections for the incident response in Mexico, national and international. So, well, basically we see if you have any problem in international, we are the first point of contact, and well, regarding the Mexican cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think as became clear as all of these folks were speaking, you can't really decouple incident response and information sharing. So information sharing is a massive part of what CERTs do, as well as the industry folks that work in incident response. Some harbor concerns that if you're sharing information or engaging with a national CERT, you are in essence reaching out to law enforcement or sharing information with the intelligence community. As we heard from Arturo, sometimes this is the case, and sometimes it's not. And this perception, whether it's true or not, can sometimes impact whether or not a member of industry readily reports an event or shares incident information. Let's start with Adam from Canada. What sorts of things does CCIRC do with the information as they receive it? And I'd like to hear a bit from Brad and Arturo on this as well, and Chris and Catherine if you have input.
So, first of all, I'd just like to emphasize that before you're doing information sharing in response to an incident, you should be doing information sharing on an ongoing basis. And before you're doing that, you should be building relationships. So the best way to know what happens to the information you might share with a CERT is to give that CERT a phone call and say hi and get to know them, get to know what resources they have available, and get to understand their role and responsibility. The last time you want to call an incident responder is when the incident is actually happening. If that's the first time you're having that conversation, you're not setting yourself up for success. And anybody who's worked in emergency management or disaster response of any kind will say, drop by, let's shake hands, let's have a conversation. So in our particular case, we are a civilian agency. If somebody comes to us, if one of you folks come to us and says, hey, I saw this on my network, it's a piece of malicious software, it seems to be reaching out to these computer addresses around the world, what can you tell me about it? We will go back to our federal partners, we'll go back to folks like Brad and US CERT, and we'll say, well, somebody gave us this piece of malicious software, and it seems to be reaching out to such and such on the internet. Have you seen anything like that? And in the community we work in, almost never will somebody actually say as the first question, well, who told you that? Because it doesn't matter who told us that. What matters is, oh, that piece of malicious software. Actually, yeah, we've seen that a lot. We've seen it across these sectors. What are you seeing? And is this more of the same, or is this something different? And any time that somebody might actually say, you know what, this looks really interesting and we'd like to speak to the company, we will go back to that company and say, you know what, you seem to have something a little bit different and a little bit unique. You might want to reach out to law enforcement and we can make that connection for you. You might want to reach out to intelligence, we can make that connection for you. And by the way, we think your subsidiary in Mexico or US might be seeing the same thing. So you might want to reach out internally in your own company, if you're multinational, and start making some phone calls. And again, we can help do that. We do not, and the only exception to this would be something where literally life or limb is at risk. We do not proactively share the name of a contact without them being okay with it, because it's not about the contact, it's about the malicious software, it's about the incident, it's about where else could it be seen, and that's what we talk about with our partners.
Yeah, and I'll add to that within our community, we actually have sharing protocols that have been set up that ensure that not only is that information anonymized as much as you want it to be anonymized, but you actually have control over the sharing, what can and can't be shared in terms of that particular piece of malicious malware, or that malware, that IP address, whatever it is that's considered malicious. Now, I will say that if we find something that's really, really bad, we come back and there's an immediate door shut. No, we don't want that. We don't want to share that with anybody else. We might make a second phone call to say, hey, are you sure about that? Because this is a really bad piece of malware. This is a bad IP address, and I think that it would benefit the rest of the world to see this. But do it in an unattributable way. And I think that's an area that in information sharing is a pretty big part of our day, is actually having those conversations and building those relationships. And it's all built around a circle of trust. You talk about incident response in our world, and I see a day in the not too distant future where our incident response centers are, we start calling them information sharing centers rather than incident response centers. And what I mean by that is, in our world, incident response in the government, setting up incident response teams, it doesn't scale very well. I'm sure that many of you are all aware of this, but we don't really work on a bottom line like industry does. We're given a certain amount of money, and we try to spend that money as wisely as we possibly can. But it's a very finite amount of money that we can spend on that. And if we've got 10 incident response teams, sometimes we'll get more money for additional incident response teams. We basically have 10 incident response teams that we can leverage. In industry, there's obviously an ability to scale that out a lot more effectively in as much as resources are available, and it can be a profitable business. And we recognize that and certainly embrace that and try to work with our industry incident response teams to work together on these incidents. Our main goal out of the incidents, getting into the incidents, of course, is making sure that the victim is back to good, but also is to get the indicators out of the incident. So if we can work closely with an incident response team in private industry, still get the indicators and know that the victim is taken care of, we're good with that. In our most recent presidential directive, PPD 41, where they lay out the difference between us and the FBI and the IC community, there's in some of the talking points, and I think even in some of the publications, there's a comparison across these organizations to the police and the firefighter when there's a fire in the house. The police in PPD 41, which talks about identifying the threat, protecting the asset, and then collecting the intel around the situation to ensure that it doesn't happen again. We consider ourselves to be the firefighter at DHS, basically meaning that we're going to walk into a burning house and we're going to do everything that we can to try to put that fire out. We're not necessarily at that point in time interested in the investigation. We're not interested in who did it. We're just interested in making sure that that organization gets back to good. Now the FBI, of course, is going to be interested in who did it, because their job is to prosecute those individuals. So we do have a responsibility to work with them, but we work with the victim to ensure that the sharing of that information is done in a way that the victim is on board with.
Thanks, Brad. I'm going to hop over Chris and Catherine really quickly. I've got a specific question for Arturo. The CERT-MX is set up a little bit differently from these two, which are technically not in policing organizations, whereas CERT-MX is in the Federal Police Bureau. How does CERT-MX interact with the rest of the federal police, and what does the information sharing situation look like within government in Mexico?
Well, just like I mentioned, the CERT-MX is quite peculiar, because we are a public safety organization, so of our primary function is to prevent and also to act when some attacks is going on. So in this case, we have some kind of rules of engagement. And basically how we operate is about everything is the framework of the law. And usually the way we interact with the organizations, being the government or private or public sector, is about agreements. We have collaboration agreements in which we define, we very granularly detail what is rules of engagement, how when some reports or incident is approached to us, how are we going to deal with that, and how far are we going to get there. It means we can just only to give some advice. Okay, you have some problems, well, do that, do this. We send some team in place to try to fix out or figure out what is the problem. And also, if they want to do the next step, we can go further and to open an investigation. In this case, open the investigations, try to find out the potential cybercriminal culprits in order to get them, basically, yes. And try to disarticulate all these rings of hackers, of persons trying to get into the, the networks or what the breach in the private or public sector.
Great. Yes. Great. So Adam mentioned in his remarks that the best way for industry and certs to interact is on a day-to-day basis, essentially. So you want to build that relationship. Chris and Catherine, both of your organizations are in a position where you are able to interact on a day-to-day basis. But at times you need to escalate that day-to-day interaction. Can you talk a little bit, perhaps Chris, you can kick this off, about what sort of a threshold would look like for elevating beyond that sort of day-to-day interaction? When do you know that you need to elevate?
So that's a challenging issue to know what the exact threshold is. I mean, one of the things that that we participated in over the last couple of years is at the NSTAC, the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Council. We wrote a paper called the ICT Mobilization Report that talks about an escalation process for which, when an event rises to a certain level from an incident response perspective, that you would actually engage and pull additional levers, potentially to do that. So on a day-to-day basis, just as Catherine mentioned, we have people that are in the NKIC that are working directly with DHS. I think that what that report contemplates is that if an event rises to a point, I think it's got the traditional kind of DHS red, green, yellow, orange kind of scale, right? But when it rises up to a particular level, you would pull the trigger and then you would actually engage in more direct incident response, and they would convene things like the Unified Response Group. So I think all that's all part of the NCIRP that's being worked on. So what exactly that threshold is, I'm not exactly sure yet. I think we'll kind of know more about it when we see it, is kind of what people have been talking about. But there are processes being put in place to do that. One other point I want to make is I want to circle back to the previous question about information sharing. I think it's really important that we not conflate like cybersecurity information sharing with surveillance, because they're actually two distinct issues. When I think of information sharing, most of what we do is we're monitoring the network for our enterprise customers or for attacks on ourselves, right? So attacks on the network or the enterprise. And so it's important that we draw the distinction there, because a company like AT&T, we're seeing over 100 petabytes of data a day. So to look at individual consumer data is really challenging from a scaling perspective. But what we can do is monitor things like attacks on our big enterprise customers like financial institutions or even the US government. And in terms of sharing, you have to also think of things in two different buckets between private to private sharing and then private to government. And a lot of the sharing that the industry does, this is something that we've discovered as we did our work in the FCC CISRIC, a lot of the work the industry is doing is actually on the private to private side. We have different vehicles inside our industry, like a network service providers group that meets weekly, where we actually do share information about network-based attacks. So it's things that are attacks on our networks so that the other ISPs can learn from each other how we're preventing those types of attacks. What we generally don't share in that context is things like customer information, so even enterprise customers, because most of our customers probably wouldn't appreciate if we were telling other folks about what's going on in their network. So I just want to make sure folks understand that there's a lot of different pieces to information sharing, but the private-to-private piece is actually probably extremely important. There is another side of it when we do have certain information and share it with government, like the AIS portal that DHS is turning up. That is still under development. I was on a panel 2 weeks ago at the INSA conference, and they were talking about the AIS portal, and I think General Tuhill at the time mentioned that there's 137 companies that were integrated with the portal, and only one was actually sending any data. That's mostly because people are still waiting to see what the value proposition is, but we shouldn't assume that all data and all sharing is about going from the private sector into the government. There's a lot of activity going on outside of the government in that realm.
So you loop back to information sharing, I'll loop back to triggers. The reason that AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, Sprint are embedded there with DHS is not because they care about my billing system. They don't care. Okay, I care, but they don't. We are there because we carry the nation's traffic. They care about disruptions to our traffic flows. They don't care about incidents. So on some level, and I know that certainly in my particular role, I am very much focused not on the incidents. I care about target, particularly if it's one of my customers, but I don't care about incidents. I care about disruptions, because disruptions are what is going to trigger a major national incident response plan. So the baseline on terms of what escalates things is, can you mitigate it? So frankly, many of the most important companies in the United States, their enterprises are managed either by me or AT&T or some managed service provider. And between that enterprise and that managed service provider, you can handle most things that come across. It's when it starts to escalate and when all of a sudden, the entities can't mitigate it, where you start to find yourself finding issues that would lead to disruption. This is what we spend our time looking at. This is what we're spending our time with the NCRP trying to address. How does one know who to call in case of a major disruption, not an incident? So in that regard, we have been spending a lot of time with DHS sort of rewriting the National Cyber Incident Response Plan in accordance with PPD 41. Once again, it will accommodate, the fact that industry will be involved. There's a lot of language issues. But you as citizens and as people who represent your entities will be able to have an opportunity to comment on this revised NCRP, which will be released imminently. There will be a whopping 30 days to comment, so read it fast, think fast, comment fast. I would say that the engagement between DHS and the FEMA team that have been doing this with industry has been good. I think they've been open, they've been accommodating, and I think that it truly recognizes that notwithstanding some of the authorities that the U.S. government might have, whether it's in the law enforcement, the intelligence, or the DHS space, candidly, the people who have their hands on the levers and the wheels that will be able to mitigate a disruption is not them, it's us. Hence the focus on that.
Are you interested in comment from Canadian and Mexican partners as well?
Certainly. I mean, in my mind, speaking as an ISP, I am global. The biggest challenge to us in the cyber environment is the harmonization of global norms, whether it's law, whether it's policy. How do you treat personal identifiable information? How do you seek attributions so that maybe you can take them down? I mean, it's the harmonization of the global environment that is a huge impediment to major global ISPs collaborating with each other and our peering partners in other countries. So we have an issue there. Now, so on the nation state side, please get your act together. On the ISP to ISP side, we already have good relationships with the major ISPs, certainly with my major global partners, peering partners. And that relationship, recognizing that disruption is a possibility, if not a potentiality. I don't think it's a potential, but a possibility. Even we are gearing up our operational response plans so that I can reach out to NTT, Deutsche Telekom, Bell Canada, so that we have that kind of major relationship says stuff is getting big enough, what can we do together? It would be helpful if the law was harmonized so that we could just have it on what we would say an operational automatic pilot. But we're not quite there yet, so we'll work around the edges while we can.
Thanks, Catherine. So one final question for you before I open it up to the audience. Let's try to keep these ones quick so we give them plenty of time for input, and if there are further questions, then that's fine. So you two in industry have a seat on the NCIC floor. which sort of institutionalizes your interaction with U.S. CERT in particular. Going down the
NCC.
line,
With the NCC.
yes, going down the line, starting with Arturo, what sorts of programs, because you can imagine there's a lot of small and medium enterprises out there that don't necessarily have the same capacity or access that these two big telecoms do. What sort of processes and mechanisms do you guys have at CERT MX, and then sort of we'll go down the line for engaging with small and medium businesses?
Well, basically, this moment in the Mexican Federal Police, we have a strategy, a cybersecurity strategy. Even though in national we do have this one, or it's very disarticulated. In this regard, we are looking forward to make some campaigns and to try to make conscious, to be aware to public, try to see the internet in which is a potential in which you do a lot of things, you make connections, you do financial, etc. But also there are a lot of people that can abuse. So in this regard, we want to make sure that people understand how they can use the internet. And also we are looking forward to make some collaboration agreements. We try to find some allies and to try to identify which people are more potential to try to influence in the different sectors, make these allies, and try to pass the message. Yeah. So in the first place, we can see our strategies, the prevention.
Great. Catherine?
How do we handle the smalls and mids?
How can CenturyLink and for Chris AT&T assist the small and mediums?
Well, as I said, we have been a member of the National Coordinating Center, which is an operational arm within the NCIC floor, down the hall from, or down the row from the U.S. CERT. For over 30 years, we have had the small and mids in the National Coordinating Center. They are our they are our NCC ISAC. We're the only information sharing and analysis center that is embedded with government. So we already have the mids, we already have the smalls, and we have trade association representation to handle the co-ops, who are the tiniest of the tiniest. When there is a fire, flood, famine, they're on the phone. If they're implicated, they're on the phone, and we're coordinating the response. We will take the same approach with any cyber incident. Knock on wood, nothing has elevated to that level. We've had to do that, but we work on it. We talk about it in the network service provider calls, which are the industry-only calls of the ISAC, weekly, and that's what we're gearing up for, to be able to continue to do it in that fashion.
Chris?
So I don't want to make a blatant plug for AT&T services, but the short answer, but I will anyway, right? So the short answer is, I think for small, medium-sized business, and it's not just an AT&T view, but I think a lot of people in the security industry would talk about the idea of managed security services for small and mid-sized companies. And the reason that those types of services are relevant is because, most small and mid-sized companies, if you follow cybersecurity, you know that there is a lot of discussion about the potential of a shortage of a cybersecurity workforce, and the ability for small and mid-sized companies to hire the right expertise and manage their own networks is a huge question mark. I'm not a small and mid-sized business, so I won't opine on the merits of that discussion, but that's an issue that a lot of people talk about. And so the concept of offering managed security services, whether they're from AT&T or whether they're from CenturyLink or any number of other security vendors, has been kind of the short answer for dealing with this issue with the smalls and mids. I think when it comes to the NCIC, the value proposition that an AT&T has is, because we partner with government, we receive information from government in terms of cyber threat indicators, our attack vectors, and we can build those capabilities into managed security services that then flow downstream. So an example of that would be, CenturyLink and AT&T are both vendors, suppliers of the ECS, the Enhanced Cybersecurity Services that DHS offers. In that environment, we take classified signatures from the government. These are basically attack vectors, signatures of attack, whatever you want to call them, and we can actually provide them to other critical infrastructure services and others as part of a service offering. So you can see a world in which some of these indicators come from government and are packaged into security services that companies provide, that as they, right now, largely enterprise focused, but as they flow downstream, eventually the small and mid-sized companies will get the benefit of that as well. And so I think that's where the relationships at the higher end for the larger enterprises ultimately become a value proposition for other entities that are out there.
Big ask from Brad and Adam, but in 30 seconds from each of you, what sorts of programs do you guys have? No, 30 seconds each, sorry. Yeah.
We'll do rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, three levels with DHS. Number one is through the signing of a cooperative research and development agreement. Typically, and that's sort of the private industry on our watch floor is sort of the manifestation of those CRADAs, CRADA being the acronym for those research agreements. But another manifestation, which is a big program for us, is our CISP program. CISP stands for Cyber Information Sharing and Collaboration Program, which is a big program that we have in place, about 160 different participants. It's one of those programs that you get out of it what you put into it. So the more information we get from those partners, the more products that we can actually put out for the greater good of the entire collective. Again, all information is anonymized. Second is through the engagement of bilateral indicator exchange. That is the automated indicator sharing program. That's one of our newer programs that was just stood up earlier this year. We've still got a long ways to go with it. That's the one we've got about 130 people connecting. We're pushing out a lot of stuff there, not getting a whole lot back. Since Stu Hill went ahead and put it out there, I'll go ahead and repeat that anybody that is part of that program would love to get some information back. And then finally, the uscert.gov website, we've got a team that does a phenomenal job of taking technical information and putting it in plain speak, and then also providing pretty good technical information as well. So whether you're a small to mid that needs some very basic information on how to secure a mobile device, or you're looking for more substantial indicators that would be likely to be processed through public internet sites, we are a good trusted source of that information on uscert.gov.
Thanks. Adam?
So what I would say to any small or medium enterprise business is, first of all, start small. Get your IT security manager or whoever's looking at security or business continuity overall for your organization to get in touch with us, get subscribed to our portal, get on our mailing list, and start receiving our products. Second, one thing that we find to be very valuable to small and medium enterprises, there's often one person in the organization who believes in this stuff and kind of understands it, but they have a lot of difficulty communicating with their management, with the ownership of the company, why this is such a big deal. And we can assist greatly with that. A lot of the products that we issue, and I have to mirror Brad on this, we spend a lot of our time trying to demystify and try to get to the so what impact so that management can understand something. And lastly, I'll go back to the old rule. If you see something, say something. If you see something weird on your network, if some incident happens, don't be shy to have your IT security people, your business continuity, emergency management people, reach out to us and start having a dialogue, because even if it looks small, even if it looks like this is probably the same kind of thing that everyone else is seeing, what we find is striking up a conversation for the first time, it gets a lot easier the second time, way easier the third time. If you're seeing something, your suppliers are probably seeing it, your clients are probably seeing it. You pointing out something can greatly assist everybody that you work with. So once that dialogue starts and once you get more comfortable reaching out to the CERT, things get a lot easier from there on out.
Thanks, all. I'll make a plug for one other growing incident response and information sharing organ that hasn't come up yet, and that's the ISACs, which can potentially serve as a force multiplier as well. But with that, we've got about 15 minutes, and I'd love to open it up and hear from the audience whether there are questions out there. And I think, do we have a microphone? So we'll start with the gentleman in the back right there, in the middle. Microphone will be on its way. Please keep your question relatively short and finish it with a question mark.
Hi, my name is Locke Kuhn. I was a founding member of the main predecessor to the First Data Corporation, which handles about 60–70% of the credit card processing in the United States and also internationally, and also on the board of a couple startup companies, emerging technology companies in medical informatics. And we find that more and more people want to move the product to the cloud. And also there's the issue of the energy grid. So my question is, has there been a focus at all on certain verticals that are critical to maybe perhaps the national issues?
Yes.
Care to expand?
And can you describe them? Not just a yes.
Well, certainly DHS through Executive Order 13691, which sort of did the cybersecurity framework, was tasked to identify certain companies upon whom we rely extraordinarily for national economic security. I know the individual states are also going through similar assessments on who do they rely on within their state to be able to support their citizens. So there is very broad recognition of key verticals and the role they play to be able to sustain our way of life. To that end, it's also within those key verticals, whether it's finance or whatever. There's also recognition that part of their continuity planning can indeed incorporate use of the cloud, use of software-defined networking, use of network function virtualization to be able to provide that continuity or a different layer of security or a different form of segmentation depending on their circumstances. So no, very clearly understood. And I think the sectors who recognize that citizens rely upon them are taking it upon themselves to be able to focus on the continuity, find the solutions, they'll be able to support them, and in many cases, you know, we're the ones who help provide that, we and others. So no, it's a very active form of engagement at this point. Does that answer your question? I think the first place to start is the the sectors, the 16 critical sectors. I think those are the first places to start, and those have been well established now for more than a decade. So.
Yeah, but I was actually looking this up coming into this meeting. It's the Critical Infrastructure Information Act of 2002. That doesn't paint me as a real bureaucrat. I don't know what it does. I can actually cite that. Laid out the requirement to identify those critical infrastructures and also provided for the ability for those critical infrastructures to provide information to the federal government for the purposes of protecting national security. I think the actual 16 sectors was not necessarily defined as part of that act, but in a presidential directive. Yeah, PPD 21, I think it was. But those 16 critical, and they are what you would expect them to be. It's energy, nuclear, information technology is one, telecommunications is one, healthcare is another one.
Finance, transportation.
Finance, transportation. And yeah, and more often than not, you'll find that the ICE Acts are actually defined around those critical infrastructures, and those are. There is a great deal of information sharing that's happening there. I think that what we are and certainly aware of and needs to evolve a little bit more and mature a little bit more is the actual the horizontal integration of information across those critical infrastructures, which is part of the puzzle that we're trying to solve right now.
Any major differences in Mexico or Canada?
Okay, well, just only if I understood the question is about where you put your information. Is that correct?
More or less, yeah.
Okay, well, basically, usually in Mexico, we have several, the trend is to put the information in the cloud, basically. And we have some breaches in several sectors, but I think basically most of the breaches we have is in the SMEs or in the regular citizens. I think the focus is more oriented in that place because this is the weakest chain in the computer security. So are looking forward to see that sector because usually regular citizens, they do not understand usually how it works, the internet, and they get abused that way. Regarding the SMEs, usually they put all the information in the cloud, but also they have a lot of information in situ or inside, in which this information is, they struggle to get profit and to survive, and usually they do not pay too much attention on what is going on inside of that, and in the SMEs, and they have a lot of breaches. Also, another problem in that case is the workforce, in which the persons or the personnel, they do not have that sense of denounce something is going on. Like they mentioned it, the idea is to use something wrong, denounce, or say something is not going well. So.
Just two comments I'd make to that. Technology is never going to stop changing, and it's never going to stop changing fast. I like to remind myself that the iPad didn't exist 6 years ago, and now, I mean, they're ubiquitous. There's one stuck on this podium, and he's not even aware of it. But the change of the tools, the change of client server to cloud or whatever, that doesn't change your ability as an organization to manage risk. It gives you a new set of tools. It might change your risk posture, but it doesn't change the capability that you have in your organization. So when it comes to managing your security and keeping abreast of Is our situation getting better? Is it getting worse? That's the role of the organization as just part of business risk management to make sure, okay, there's this new tool that's available, a new trend, people are moving to the cloud, is this the right thing for us? And the second comment I would make in order to help answer that question is talk to your CERT, talk to your ISACs, talk to your industry partners, talk to your vendors. The vendors who do this kind of stuff are experts at it. They're learning as they go, but because they're helping many, many clients at the same time, they're learning very fast. So it's the partnerships and the community building where you can find those answers and understand, look, is this the right thing for us at this time? Where are the areas where people are understanding that something is particularly critical? Have we hit some particularly sensitive points in certain areas where we realize, whoa, we need to take special measures, or we need to do cloud in a certain way, or we need to make sure security procedures are set up in a certain way? Many, many people are having those conversations, so go find them and have the conversations with them. And if you ask questions and you're not getting the answers, then keep asking.
In the interest of time, because we're running right up against it, I'm going to package, I see 3 hands here. I'd like to package those 3 questions together and then give each of the panelists a bit of time to respond to any or all and some final remarks as well. So we'll start right there in the middle.
Steve Sullivan, Department of Commerce, Office of North America. Catherine mentioned the biggest challenge being harmonization of global norms, and I'm just curious as to what is going on in that respect in North America in terms of the government cooperation on the harmonization of norms.
And we'll come up here to the front.
Hi, my name is Jack Krapansky, unaffiliated. My question is, what about state and local, especially first responders, police, fire, and local governments with all sorts of data, whatever? Again, they don't have big budgets, and how does that? Is there any outreach from Homeland Security or any initiatives in that area?
And one more right here.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, Rick Weber at Insight Cybersecurity. I guess this is for Catherine, Chris, and Brad. So PPD response plan, as Catherine said, is imminent. Could you guys maybe give us a quick rundown of how the plan that's coming out would be different from the current interim plan and the process that currently exists?
All right, so we have harmonization of global norms, which is a massive question and a panel in and of itself, but we'll try to touch on some of that. State and local first responders, what about them? And the new incident response plan, how does it differ from the previous one? And then any final thoughts you have, we'll just go down the line and start with Adam right here.
So on the global harmonization question, it is a panel in and of itself. I'd actually like to pick up on what some of the folks here on the panel have said, which is the private sector can show an awful lot of leadership in this. An awful lot of commerce, information exchange, dialogue back and forth between nations is happening in the private sector. Those are the folks who are driving business, trying to drive broader business relationships around the globe. And it makes it a heck of a lot easier for us in government to get our acts together, as a lot of people keep telling us to do correctly. When we get private sectors from 3 or 4 different nations coming to us saying, you know what, we've kind of had this conversation and we figured this out and this is what we'd all like you to collectively do. And then we can just kind of nod our head and say, wow, really good thinking, that makes it easy. On the state and local question, I really want to applaud you for asking that question because, as Brad was saying, every government is very constrained. Governments don't actually have any money. All we have is the right to spend our own money. So we need to be very, very careful about how we do that. We in Canada have ongoing relationships with our provinces and our territories. We work very hard to reach out to the government information technology service providers to help them do what they do. We also try very hard to advocate for broader cybersecurity policy issues, education, awareness, capacity building with all of those governments and try to say, look, this is not just a business risk to be managed. This is a tremendous opportunity for our people. There's growing business here, and this is the wave of the future. The more that you can educate your kids and get your government going in the direction of the future, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, so a response specific to the United States on state and local. We do work very closely and quite frankly, through a pass-through grant, help support the MSISAC, which is located up in New York. They run an operation that's very similar to the operation that we run down here in Washington, D.C. That is a watch floor for all subscribed state and local municipalities. They have a sensor network that is very similar to our sensor network. Our sensor network is called Einstein. Their sensor network is called Albert. They leverage that in it. And quite frankly, I was up there about a year ago doing a tour of their facility, and they've actually got, just based on their size, a lot more flexibility to build out their sensor network with some pretty cool tools. So we're taking a look at some of the stuff that they're doing right now and seeing if we can get it through our big fat procurement machine and try to do some of the same things, because they've got some pretty cool stuff going on. But that's how we engage with the state and locals, and it's worked fairly well. We've had a couple situations fairly recently, especially through some of the election kerfuffle that's been going on, where we've actually been able to work with them pretty closely to help pull and compare indicators across all the different state and local municipalities. I won't go too much into the insert, other than just to characterize it the way I see it, which is that it's probably not much different than what's being done, other than it's codifying what's being done a little bit more specifically, I guess. We will have a mechanism by which we can stand up government notification in the event an incident rises to a certain level of escalation. We will also have the ability to provide that same level of coordination across our private industry partners, and that's the UCG, or the Unified Communications Group, that Catherine referenced earlier. Those mechanisms have been in place, and we've actually been leveraging those mechanisms in the past. We're kind of doing it on sort of a feel, and not necessarily on any kind of specific prescribed approach. So this kind of will give us the ability to do it a little bit more specifically. And I think the one thing that I don't necessarily will be very specifically defined in the insert, but will be coming not too far thereafter, is that escalation. We sort of know what it is, and we've actually practiced it in the past, but in terms of actually codifying it for public consumption, I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be defined in the insert. Catherine might have more information on that. I don't know, but that's about as much as I have on that piece right there. What's that? I don't think it will be. I don't think it'll necessarily be defined in the versions that I've seen. The escalation, what defines an escalation from a white to a green to a yellow to an orange to a red?
I think that's already been provided as an attachment to the PPD, to the extent that they're going to discuss it.
Yeah. Chris?
So on the first issue of harmonization of global norms, my sense is that at least in North America, there's a lot of relationships that have already been built, and I think we're working together pretty well. I think the bigger challenge is as we move further east, some of the challenges we have in particular countries that you all know about. Within the ISP space, there's been a lot of activity. We've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years now, just how within the private sector itself, how can we work better with our internet, with the other large carriers internationally, and Catherine kind of touched on this. We've had NTT join the Communication Sector Coordinating Council as a member. They participate with us on a variety of different issues. There's been discussions going on with Deutsche Telekom, with BT, with Bell Canada, with other entities about how do we work better together and sharing information. And I think ideally, as time goes by, we'll develop a mechanism for the ISPs to kind of collaborate more as these events happen, so we can deal with some of these attacks through better international relationships. I think that's an area that the private sector needs to kind of and can continue to enhance, and that work is active. On the first responder issue, I totally agree on MSISAC. That's the entity through which a lot of the states are integrating today on cybersecurity matters. The only thing I'll add to that is that there are a lot of other initiatives going on, like the National Governors Association and NCSL, the National Council of State Legislators. They're working on, what is the policy framework and proposals that states should be putting forth to address cybersecurity. So, and then it goes into things like funding and organizing the efforts of first responders in the states. And so there's a lot of attention being played at that level around what is the right way to deal with some of these issues at the state level. We certainly, as AT&T, and I think for the comm sector as a whole, we certainly support states kind of getting organized in that fashion. So I think that work's ongoing. And then on the NCIRP, I'll let Catherine kind of walk through the details, but I think the most important thing, and I think this goes to your point, is that, you know, in the past, the incident response plan was never actually finalized, the previous versions that were done like in 2010, 2011. One of the strongest recommendations we've had to government is just having a plan and having a laid out process and escalation flow is of critical importance. And so I think that's the number one outcome that we're going to get out of that process, but I'll let Catherine speak to the specifics.
Have at it.
Okay. One, shout out to Adam. I can't I have to really put a foot stomp on the role of the various multinationals that ultimately, when you look at it, there's probably less than 200 multinational firms that actually are running the internet, okay? The huge, the whole ecosystem, everything from the people who do BIOS to OS to the certificate authorities, the DNS guys, the ISPs, you know, but it's a global environment. And I can tell you without equivocation, no matter whether I'm talking to a Microsoft or I'm talking to an Apple, it is our goal to keep things working. So if we can come together and figure out how do you keep things working, and then we go to Canada or the United States or whichever country and we say, really, I think this would be helpful globally. Really, it's because we've kind of already done some of that preliminary work. So, you know, we appreciate the ongoing dialogue. On the state local, yes, I'm going to foot stomp the MS-ISAC, the multi-state ISAC. Perhaps, but more importantly, is that right now the states have recognized that national security is built on state security. So the National Governors Association, the National Council of State Legislatures are certainly trying to get their act together. What they have done, though, and which we are, it's not so much promoting, but we're advocating as saying this is a good first step. The National Association of State CIOs put together how does the state do cyber disruption planning response? And it's a whole sort of whole state, and they have it was built upon the state of Michigan's approach, which is lovely. And really what it does is it gives a state a good way to get a handle on how do I decide what's most important in my own enterprise, what do I rely on, how do I go about protecting it so that we don't have a disruption. With respect to the PPD, I agree with Brad. It is definitely a refinement. No question about it. But it's an important refinement. It's an important refinement because the government now has a better sense of how they will engage, collaborate, and work with each other, which gives us, industry, a template for how we kind of, you know, insert in or slot in. And once there is a plan, believe me, you know, I think industry will sort of fill in whatever cracks are necessary. So yes, we're very, very much focused on getting the plan done.
Arturo, final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'll try to be brief. Well, basically in the global harmonizations, we have a quiet perspective in this case. We're looking forward to harmonize regarding the laws. When we have some kind of investigations, we have problems because we do not talk in the same language. Some people perhaps even in the same country, they don't understand also. There's a lot of judge or law enforcement, they don't understand we're working in several cases. So in this, we think that one of the biggest efforts we have to do is to try to harmonize in a perspective of the law. And we bet for the Convention of Budapest, in which we think that this could be an instrument to try to get that point. But it requires a lot of efforts. We have to change our laws, and it's quite complicated. Regarding about safe local or first responders, we try to create some cyber police in every state, in which try to pass the knowledge and to try to recreate another teams of assessors to the interior of the country, in order to they are able to handle the problems in the first place, and also to escalate in case it get more complicated or you get a national issue, escalate and work together in order to try to deal with the threats and attacks we have seen very often in the internet.
That's a fascinating model that I'd be interested in hearing more about if we had more time. But join me in thanking these five for the excellent conversation. Hand it back over to Ross.
All right. As folks shuffle off here, again, I will reiterate Rob's thanks to the panelists, and I'll also say thank you to Rob for a fascinating first panel. One of the topics that got touched on in that first panel was small and medium enterprise, but it didn't get the focus that perhaps it deserves, given the unique sort of place that small and medium enterprises find themselves. So fortunately, we're going to have an entire panel on the topic. And so for that, I would like to welcome our second moderator, Ola Sage. I hope I've pronounced that right. Great. She's the founder and CEO of eManagement, which is a minority-owned, woman-owned small business, an award-winning IT and cybersecurity company. She's also the elected chair of the Executive Committee of the National IT Sector Coordinating Council. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Information Systems and a Master's degree in Technology Management from George Mason. Please join me in welcoming Ola.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'd like to welcome up to the stage our next panelists, Alfredo Reyes-Kraft, Terry Williams, and Paul Haynes. And because there are only 3 of you, I get to sit down. Actually, I'll start out. I'm going to give a brief kind of 1-minute introduction of the panelists, and then each of the panelists is going to talk for a few minutes about their organizations, their companies, what they do, and then once we're through with that, I will start out with a question for all the panelists. I really would like to open up this conversation to the audience to be as interactive as possible, so my questions will be limited. But let me first start by, on my extreme right, Mr. Alfredo Reyes-Kraft is the founding partner and chairman of Lex Informatica Abogados. Did I say that right? Oh, great. Which is a law and consulting firm that offers consultation in information rights, intellectual property, privacy, and information security. He's also an executive vice president at AMPICI, which is the Internet Mexican Association, and also a member of the Telecommunications Law Institute. He has all kinds of accomplishments to his credit, but I will let him share more of those with you. Next to Alfredo is Jay Haynes, thank you, who is the CEO of eCentire, a Canadian company that provides mid-sized enterprises with advanced cybersecurity capabilities. And Jay has led eCentire to 20 times its size since he joined the company in 2010. I'm really interested in a little bit about how you did that. But maybe that's for another panel. And then to my right is Terry Williams, who is a director of the USTA, Institute for Economic Development, Small Business Development Center, Procurement Technical Assistance Center. Try saying that fast. 5 times. Terry's responsible for managing staff in federal, state, and privately funded programs that are focused on assisting small businesses in contracting with the federal, state, and local governments, as well as the private sector. Terry is a certified economic developer and also chairperson of the South Central Texas Regional Certification Agency and a member of the Texas Economic Development Council, among others. So with that, I'd like to open it up to our distinguished panel to talk a little bit more about your organizations. Terry, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say good morning to everyone and thank the organization for having me. Just one correction, UTSA, it's the University of Texas at San Antonio. All of my career has been in San Antonio, Texas, but I've had opportunities to participate at a national level as well as local and state levels on other initiatives and opportunities. One such initiative, of course, is why we're here this morning, is cybersecurity awareness for small business. Our funding sources for all of our programs, except for one, comes from the federal government, comes from the Department of Defense, the Small Business Administration, from the state of Texas, and then lastly, one of our programs is funded by J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation. So our program, and this is our second year that we've instituted a program on small business cybersecurity awareness, and that's funded in particularly by the Small Business Administration. So we've incorporated that program into our small business emergency preparedness program and business continuity program. And in the back, as well as at the front registration table, I have information panel cards on that program as well. These programs are part of the Small Business Development Centers. Small Business Development Centers, which I feel really has, if you will, the answer as to how to engage small and medium enterprises in this effort. We have a network of over 1,000 centers or offices across the United States, 4,500 advisors in all of those centers, as well as what we've instituted at the University of Texas. We have an agreement with the U.S. State Department, and we've also instituted SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, at an international level. We have started SBDCs in 20 countries, 68 centers so far in those countries, which include a lot of the South American countries and the South Caribbean countries. So there are 68 SBDCs through agreements with the State Department and the ministerial governments of those countries. In 2016, we are poised to launch 103 more centers in those particular countries. And they include Mexico, it includes Brazil, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and many others. So that's our linkage to the international part and how we continue to try to engage small and medium sized businesses.
Thank you.
So I'm with eCentire, and the reason we've grown so fast is because we serve the mid-market, and there's a vacuum there. Not a lot of firms focus on the mid-market. I'll come back to that. But the headlines tend to drive awareness, and Panama leaks. Every month there's something new coming out about that. So law firms all of a sudden are very, very attuned to it, and financial hacks are so common. eCentire is what's technically called a managed security service provider. We have an advanced tradecraft that we bring to the equation, but we basically take on the responsibility for the customer, the primary security function for the customer, and that is. It's not for the weak of heart, because you're constantly under attack and 24/7, time zones all over the world. But it's interesting, as we've grown, we have about 700 customers now. The amount of threat intel that we gather in our primary markets informs us in very interesting ways. I'll go into that in a second. Our markets are principally mid-sized financial services. In the U.S., there's a category called registered investment advisors. So it's be like hedge funds, private equity firms, the 1%, or the 1% of the 1%. Investment banking, REITs, and insurers, and many others in that category. We also have legal. We have IP-based firms, which will include biopharma all the way to software, healthcare. So quite a wide range. The biggest market, though, is financial services, and it continues to grow the fastest for us. The aperture that we have, about 75% of our traffic is coming from that category. We're securing about 3.2 trillion of assets under management as the primary security firm. So it's been interesting that we have more threat intel on who's attacking that market in the U.S. than the U.S. regulators or law enforcement. So we've developed some interesting relationships as a result. And despite, and I talk about this all the time, despite the the tendency to bring Hollywood and CSI, it's pretty mundane, opportunistic cybercrime. It's that's what we got to come to terms with. 99% of the traffic is ranging from ransomware or non-targeted phishing. But because these firms don't have anybody with a security function 24/7, and by the way, it takes 10 people to do that continuously, they have 5 people in IT in a 1,000-person firm, and they're not worrying about security. It's half of one person's job. So you can't have eyes on glass 24/7. You can't investigate all of the alerts that the technologies generate. So this is sort of what the challenge is for mid-sized enterprise. You have now a very great awareness. Target, I would say, being the watershed event that showed how your supply chain can be your the weakest link into your security. They had a very sophisticated security organization, but the HVAC vendor from Philadelphia didn't, and that's how the bad guys snuck in. So as a result of that, regulators have escalated pressure on executives in the mid-sized supply chain to start taking it a little more seriously. In 2014, the SEC sent out, and we'll contrast this to how it happens in Canada. They sent out a document sweep request to select firms that said, you got to answer these 28 questions in 14 days or face a $5 million fine or 20 years in jail. So boom, they got everyone's attention. It's sort of shock therapy. In Canada, we send out a survey document that sort of first starts with sorry. If you don't mind, could you fill this out? But I mean, that's typical everywhere else in the world. But what's happened as a result of that is this 28 questions in this particular segment, this is true in others, has served to sort of become a standard. So we've converted into a compliance like chart. And when we go to other jurisdictions all over the world, we're in 40 countries, anyone interconnecting with their counterparties in the US or they have a domicile here is going to that as the highest standard. If you look at how data processing environments work, they're all commingled. You can't separate the data that's in the UK or Canada from the US. So what they do is just go to this highest standard so they could sustain a favorable outcome through an audit. So we find that quite fascinating, and it has been certainly driving our business abroad as well. But if we get into specifically what mid-sized firms can and can't do, there's a whole category of cybersecurity capabilities we would call prevention technology. And that would be, start with firewalls and antivirus appliances, now there's intrusion detection and on and on. And having a stack of that we call defense in depth. No matter how good your prevention capabilities are, and it doesn't matter if you're JPMC or the military, the bad guys who are very talented but morally corrupt will figure out a way around it. So you've got to understand that there's only so much prevention you can do and come to terms with the fact that stuff is going to leak through. And that's what we built this business to do. We catch what leaks through and we intervene on it so that it doesn't become, I think in context of the previous panel, a business altering or disrupting event. So it's basically clean up an aisle 6 24/7 in our business, and we're constantly dealing with these attackers and minimizing dwell time. A lot of folks don't understand. When you read these reports about the 250-day to detection, that's because nobody had an ability to detect, and most of those are learned through outside organizations, 90% in some cases. And certainly in the mid-market, we would have our friends in the agencies and the certs saying, hey, by the way, you got some bad traffic in there. Your IP showed up in this log that we got. So it's important to understand that particular context. There's another thing that we've also found in terms of how we look at our response. It's through various activities we've done with law enforcement. They still tend to break it down to means, motive, and opportunity as the main drivers. And a lot of people don't appreciate the sort of the underworld online, or the dark web as we often call it. every hacking tool that has a high degree of success is largely available either as a service or in source code format. You could take an 8-hour YouTube training. You can basically go from nothing to an effective hacker in very short order. We would submit 40 hours if you had some bit of a technical background. So what happens is you have well-educated people in disadvantaged parts of the world, $27 a day driving a taxi in Bucharest, and they hear about their pal who went to the dark side and he made 50 or 100 grand in a couple weeks worth of work. The motive is there. And then the biggest challenge that we have is law enforcement. Even though we have 98 cooperating Interpol countries, you can't get boots on the ground with a prosecutable warrant in any meaningful time. It's typically 6 to 9 months. And these guys are gone in a matter of days. So this is the challenge. The firms have to defend themselves. If you talk to the folks in, say, the FBI, the list of things that they can respond to with their limited resources is fairly short, yet they've got, a very long list of incidents. So this is a challenge with law enforcement around the world. It's incumbent on organizations to take these matters into their own hands. The challenge that we have is the rate at which the success, due to the multiplier effect of, they told 2 friends and then each of them told 2 friends and so forth, is causing the rate of hacking that's having monetary success to rise at an exponential function. Yet the rate at which we're training human cybersecurity professionals is fairly flat. So these curves are diverging, and while large enterprise is very capable of solving that problem themselves, the mid-market isn't. And now they are pushing their regulatory pressures to their supply chain. So you will see law firms now really engaging. As an example, all the big law firms work with financial institutions. Financial institutions are getting audited. They're pushing the audit requirements. The term is DDQ. I don't know if anyone in here has lived through a DDQ, but some of the banks would have 1,000 audit points, and it can shut down your IT department. So trying to be prepared just to be able to continue to stay in business. And it's kind of, it works to the extent, the 2 men in the bear. You don't have to be faster than the bear, just the other guy. So if your suppliers are able to mount a reasonable degree of efficacy in their cyber defenses and detection capabilities, then there's a good chance that will be enough of a deterrent for the bad guys. Some of the stuff that we do deal with that is a little interesting, and I'm going to bring in some of the threat sharing. We've been with FSISAC, with the Financial Services Information and Sharing Analysis Center, for about 4 years now. We were the first service provider that was sort of let inside, and we share a lot of information with them. We're one of the, as we heard on the previous panel, there's a lot of people receiving, not too many contributing. We're one of the very active contributors. One of the things that we contributed in November of 2013 was a bunch of threat intel related to what became known as FIN4. And it was shared amongst the community. Now, FIN4, for those you probably don't know, but this was a group of threat actors that were getting access to pre-public information and front-running trades. So basically, embargoed information in the hands of law firms, and hedge funds, public relations firms. And it was a perfect victimless crime. The strategy of the hedge fund might be to make 50 million. These guys make 40. They make 40, and then 10 goes to the threat actors, and this went on for several years. Apparently, few responded to that. They ultimately caught them in September of 2015, and they claimed that they made over 100 million in this scheme that had gone on for years. So we do see some of those. And we had North Korea and a 100-person asset manager in New York City. Now, what North Koreans are doing in there, nobody knows. FBI is scratching their head. Could be that they have a SWIFT system and there's a way to maybe monetize it and make money. But those are rare for us. It's mostly opportunistic threat actors, ransomware. That's what we normally see. So I will pause there and hand it over to the next.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, Alfredo.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for the invitation. My English is not good, but I try to explain. My name is Alfredo Reyes. I'm a lawyer. I work before in 27 years in the financial sector. I'm now a partner of Lex Informatica, an IT law firm. I'm vice president of the Mexican Internet Association, AMIPSI, which integrates the companies that represent an influence of the development of the internet industry in Mexico. Every year, AMIPSI undertakes the task of carrying out studies based on the use of internet in Mexico to guide and promote market growth. As industry association, we are involved to know and understand the cybersecurity challenges of our partners, but the most important, the Mexican society and economy. Nowadays, the small and medium businesses are very important for the core of Mexican economy. However, these kind of enterprises are not pretty involved with their cyber security problems. Mexican Internet Association works strongly side by side with the government, citizen, industry, small and medium enterprises, and non-profit organizations in order to support the e-commerce and the security of the internet stakeholders. The growth of the internet has been the biggest social and technological change of our lifetime. It is a massive force of God in the world in the way it drives growth, reduces barriers to trade, and allows people across the world to communicate and cooperate. At the same time, our increasing dependence on cyberspace has brought new risk where the key data and systems on which we know really can be compromised or damaged in ways that are hard to detect or defend against. Once a person has been the victim of online crime, the impact on his life can be extensive. Cybercrime has cost that go beyond the financial. Consumers around the world lost an average 21 hours over the past year dealing with the fallout from online crime, and nearly more than $300 on average per person, enough for a years of home security. It's important. Thank you very much.
No, good.
Okay, more?
Keep going, absolutely.
In Mexico, there are 65.8 million internet users, 59% of the population. 77% is connected, though on a smartphone, only 69% on a PC. Internet dissemination among the individuals is more or less 53%. More than the 70% of internet users has only been using the network for about 5 years. The main reason to connect for the first time was to look the information on the networks and secondly, to use. The principal barriers to access the internet today are a slow connection, 30%, technical problems with the company, 26%, and high cost, 25%. However, 38% have never suffered any problems. Activities. The main activity performed by internet user is social networks, about 18%. Surprising above of sending and receive mails and instant messages. Other lesser users are watching movies, streaming series, 96%, online playing, 96%, visiting sites, it's 95%, or downloading movies, series, music, podcast, 94%. Within the professional usage, it includes negotiations with the government, taxes and other things, 37%, training 31%, and job searching 30%. Among the mentioned activities before, on the next 12 months, the expectations will be the increasing of online courses, 37%, online shopping, 33%, also the increasing use of social network, movies and TV shows, streaming, information browsing and delivery, receiving emails and or instant messages. Having access to the internet has changed the habits of 90 of the internet users, such as the way how we listen to music, watch movies, and interpersonal relationships. Most of the users get online while being home, 87%, followed by the mobility allowed of smartphones and other devices, 52%, which has one strong presence, and lastly, the works places, 38%, technology to access Wi-Fi, it's mainly by contract, 84%, followed by contract mobile data plan, 27%, and public Wi-Fi places, 26%. Mexicans spend about 7 hours and 14 minutes online per day, 1 hour and 32 minutes more than the shown in the past study. In the case of online sales, the majority of online sales are from within Mexico, and 3 out of 4 online sales via PC. Retailers report an average on 5% chargebacks. It's important, chargebacks. The top 4 categories sold online are apparel, sports, electronics, and other categories. The large number of incidences is not listed other categories, indicates the diversification that the e-commerce offers. By sales value, excluding travel, the top 4 categories and other categories not listed: consumer electronics, computers, peripherals, PDAs, and event tickets. Retailers expect shopping to increase around the El Buen Fin, Christmas, and Hot Sale. Almost 9 in 10 retailers are aware of the AMIPSI trust mark, but only 2 in 5 offer the trust mark on their site. Almost all retailers are aware of the El Buen Fin. The Buen Fin is something similar to Black Friday, and Hot Sale it's something similar as Cyber Monday events. The online stores, most retailers use a website or online store, self-operated. These sites accept most major payment types, including credit and debit cards, PayPal, and bank transfer. Almost all accept Visa or MasterCard. 3 in 5 retailers have a mobile application. Most retailers engage in a variety of online marketing efforts, including offering sales and promotions. The security and the warranty of receiving your money is the main concern of the retailers. This is the more principal statistics about internet.
Thank you very much. This is a question for the audience. Does anyone know how many hours U.S. citizens are online? I heard 7 hours and 14 minutes in Mexico. Huh?
It's a lot.
Are we higher, you think? Interesting. Somebody can Google that while I'm asking other questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody less than 20
Right, right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I just caught myself when I was saying Google that. I should say search, right? Although Google, I'm sure, would like that. Okay, so let me, thank you very much for those remarks. It certainly sounds like all of your companies and organizations have a lot of capabilities and capacity to support small and medium-sized business enterprises with this problem. And I think, Jay, you talked about your sweet spot is typically 1,000 or so, employee companies.
Yeah, 20 to 1,000.
Oh, okay. So your range is
go all the way down. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll start with you, Terry, but I'd like to hear, and I'm actually going to start with one of the questions that was framing this panel, which is, what challenges are you seeing as you work with these small and medium-sized business enterprises in your area that they're facing in cybersecurity? And if you have any percentage of those or numbers that are actually doing business internationally, what kinds of issues are you hearing them raise?
I don't particularly have the international numbers, but what they face in cybersecurity is not unlike anything else that they face just being small business owners. The challenges of resources, the challenges of capacity, the challenge of training their employees, whether they are a 2-person operation or a 500-person operation. One of the ways that we try to prevent that or try to assist with that is through preventive measures, through first engaging them through outreach, and utilizing some of our other partner organizations. Currently, we have a database of clients just in our network alone of over 12,000 business owners. And that, again, varies from either the 2-person operation to the 500 or 800-person operation. So that first step is outreach, getting them in, getting them to understand the importance of cybersecurity preventive maintenance, if you will. Secondly is education. Of course, we are an educational institution, but this is a little different than just academic type education, but education in the form of training, in the form of what exactly do they need to know, and then how do they do it. We find the next step, we throw out a lot of information as to what they need to do, but their particular challenge is, okay, I know all of this, I know what I need to do, how do I do it? You know, how exactly do I set up this firewall? How exactly do I, what software do I purchase? How exactly do I set up the network? What they need next is the how-to. And then thirdly, advising and one-on-one assistance. So that comes in with the how-to. Actually sitting down with them, actually providing that training to their employees, actually including that in an employee handbook. We also provide HR management assistance in the form of an employee handbook. So incorporating that information, what employees need to know about cybersecurity, and then really kind of putting it in layman terms. Usually when we talk to them about cybersecurity, using that term, you get the deer in the headlights look, okay? It's goes way over here, and then they stop listening. So putting it in layman's terms as to what is allowable for their employees to, as far as utilizing their computers, as far as utilizing the internet, who actually needs access to it, so that all of their employees knows what's allowable, what's not allowable. And then when they find someone who's not following that rule, then something needs to be enforced, okay? Something needs to be done, and having a policy on that as well. So our plan is to actually sit down once we've brought them in through the outreach, Then once we've done the education through the training workshops, through webinars, through our SBDC Global Network, which reaches out at an international level to train clients as well as advisors. So once we have done that, then the follow-up takes place as far as the one-on-one, bringing them. I have a staff just covering the San Antonio area of 12 counselors and advisors. So making one-on-one appointments with them as far as, okay, what our next step is the how-to, is following up and making sure that they, the client or the business owner, has actually done the how-to. Because if they don't get to the how-to, all of the education and the training and the stats is useless, means nothing. So what we're trying to do is actually help develop suppliers, help develop them as suppliers who are cybersecurity ready, because we know these things typically don't trickle down, they trickle up, if you will, from the small business to the targets, to those that are suppliers to targets through financial systems, through other means that they are integrating themselves as suppliers to the larger businesses. There are also federal requirements. Earlier was we mentioned the procurement technical assistance centers. There are over 100 of those centers, several centers sometimes in each state, that assist those who want to contract with the federal government. Well, as you know, there's a DFAR supplement. I'm going to throw out some numbers here. Supplement 252.204-7012. I'm just anal like that, I remember that, okay? But that supplement requires those that are currently doing business with the federal government, as well as those that intend to do business with the federal government, to meet certain standards to control classified and unclassified information. So they have, currently they have, these businesses have until December of 2017 to comply with that rule. So we are educating businesses on that rule as well, because we deal with a lot of them that are contracting with the federal government to help them either become compliant or meet that rule by 2017.
Thank you. Jay, would you like to take a?
Yeah, I could, from a different perspective, one of the challenges is it's all cost. Everything in cybersecurity, there's no ROI. It's quite a challenge. Most business investments are have got some kind of ROI. So it's, you know, as the attacker, you have to be right once, and as a defender, you have to be right 100% of the time. So it's all downside if you're not correct. So it's a very unbalanced battleground that you're in. So what we have found, so the cost is controlled by the C-suite, and when you show up to a cybersecurity meeting with a director of technology, you're talking zeros and ones and speeds and feeds and all this packet cap. Like it devolves very quickly into a very technical world, and the C-suite kind of glazes over. What you have to do is convert it into a risk management discussion, and they manage risk across all different dimensions depending on the businesses they're in. Some are international, some are environmental, health, place, work, and safety. There's a long list. So you can monetize risk, and you can transfer some of it to insurance, although limited, and then you can put certain risk mitigation strategies in place internally. And you could spend $500,000 or $2 million, and you may get exactly the same results. That's sort of the challenge I was talking about earlier with prevention. Doesn't work anymore. So it's really, then it gets down to a question of where should you be spending your money for a certain amount of risk mitigation. So I think that's the trend that we're going to see. This is very this is very mature at the sort of Fortune 500 world, but in the SMEs, they've not had a cyber risk discussion before, and they haven't had it in monetary terms, and it's challenging. It's not easy to put a dollar figure on it, but that's, I think, where it has to go.
Thank you. Alfredo?
Thank you very much. The most important topics in cybercrime scenario for small and medium businesses nowadays, I think, are economic resources to invest in security tools, hardware, ransomware, vulnerabilities of hardware and software, payment systems, attacks through employee system or employee steals of information, cloud services, security access and configurations, wearables, warehouse of stolen data, integrity, cyber espionage, sharing threat intelligence. The main actions to be taken for the regulation and prevention of these problems, I think they are to promote collaboration between governments, entities, industry, and the CERTs in order to protect the enterprises of the cybercrime menaces effectively. To correctly balance of the citizen and individuals' rights as freedom of expression and privacy, preventing the over-regulation. St. Thomas says you can sin by excess or by defect. It's the over-regulation. It's bad, like the less regulation. To notify internet users about the vulnerabilities of their data. The comprehensive notification. International diplomacy to collaborate between governments in order to face cybercrime risk as a unit. On the other hand, the regulation must focus in avoiding restrictive copyright and intellectual property legislation which criminalize directly to the users. Implement the notice and takedown procedures as mandatory for small enterprises, which will have acquired the obligation of scrutinizing the user's behavior. To not obligate enterprises to get backdoors and open their networks to the government, protecting the privacy of the users. To not obligate the enterprises to prosecute once hacking activity is detected. Otherwise, they must be able to rely and be supported by the authorities. The new challenges for the international regulations and authorities are create new regulations in regards of cybercrime activities, which includes illegal access to hardware and software, denial of services, identity theft, phishing, network hacking, personal data selling, and hacktivists. Arturo talked about the Budapest cybercrime. No? In conclusion, the Mexican Internet Association works strongly side by side with the government, citizens, industry, small and medium enterprises, and non-profit organizations in order to support the e-commerce and the security of the Internet stakeholders.
Thank you. I want to pick up on a comment. I think, Jay, you raised it, and Terry, I think you were talking in the context of educating small and medium-sized businesses, but about changing the conversation from one of it being a technical-only problem to a risk management problem. And I think we heard earlier the Deputy Secretary talk about the creation of the cybersecurity framework that NIST led, in collaboration with government and industry. And so, and that's a frame that really speaks to that issue. I'm curious to hear, in your interactions with small businesses and in your countries, what types of best practices kind of govern. You talked about your 28 questionnaire, but kind of at the national level, what are you doing if you are in fact, using any elements of the framework? If you have your own. If you could talk a little bit about that and how those apply to small and medium business enterprises in this context of risk management.
I can start with that. There are many frameworks out there. There's really two categories. One are the prescriptive ones, like ISO 27000. Some of you might have heard that. Basically, it lays out what you have to do at various levels of maturity. And then NIST, which is a much more adaptive. It allows you to recognize your particular business issues and adapt to that. So we actually advocate NIST, which I don't know if you do as well. It's very well adopted globally. So for us, NIST is a good framework. And the challenge a lot of people, that are new, you can't start from zero and go to full competency or your best practices overnight. At least doing it internally, you can bring in outside firms and achieve that quicker. But it still takes time and process and rigor. It starts with you need to have at the board level, you need to have a cybersecurity policy, and many firms don't have that. Once you have a policy, you can measure against it, and where we see best practices is having a committee of the board that opines on this and might present quarterly, at least annually, somewhat like the audit committee, very parallel to that. So how do you measure yourself? You can do it in risk management jargon, but you also have to. There's a technical assessment, sort of an audit level that you could have third parties look at, and that's where we would advocate a NIST framework most often. And then you compare yourself to your progress on your plan with that framework.
Terry, what are you seeing? Are your small businesses even aware of the framework?
Well, okay, I'm going to give a shout out again to Adam Sedgwick with NIST. Actually, we all kind of just left an annual conference, the America's SBDC conference that was held last week in Orlando, Florida, in which there were 3 sessions, particularly on cybersecurity. And we actually got to share some of the best practices that were being utilized by the other SBDCs around the country. One in particular, Michigan's SBDC, Small Business Development Center, is utilizing an assessment type of questionnaire that they've developed. Another, what I would consider best practice, one thing I failed to mention earlier is that the services that all the SBDCs provide is at no cost because of the funding mechanisms through the federal government. So all of these services that's provided to small businesses, they don't have to pay anything because, again, of the funding mechanisms. So one of the things that we'll be advocating, because it's, in my mind, in layman terms, is the document that NIST provides, and that can be found on their website as well. And then another best practice, if you have partnerships with a university, most universities have computer science departments. Some of them, like ours, we have a cybersecurity infrastructure and assurance, a Center for Infrastructure and Assurance Security. Actually was ranked the #1 cybersecurity department in the country. So we will be partnering with them to provide the technical assessments to the small businesses. So that actually gives an additional step, if you will, as a best practice, is to form that partnership with that local either university or organization that can take it to the next level and actually do that technical assessment.
In Mexico, in the universities, we have specialties and diplomates and master's degree in security. But we have too many frameworks and good practices, but not all enterprises know them and apply them. We use the framework of APEC, ISO 27000, it's 100, PCI for the financial sector. We have Mexican specific norms about security with NICE, with a Mexican organization, and we are talking about that we capacite the personnel. The INAI, National Data Protection Institute in Mexico, are working about these themes, and other economy minister are working about that. And like Mexican Association of Internet, we are working to promote educational models about security for the enterprise.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Any questions or comments? This lady in the middle here.
Thank you. Nina Collars, unaffiliated. Jay, you mentioned that that your organization shares with FSI-SAC, and you said that there's this problem of information sharing, which is that there's a lot of taking but not a lot of giving back. So what explains why your organization does so? And so who do you see as the primary givers of information, and who tends to hold back?
Well, with FSI-SAC, there's about 5,000 members. It was started by banks, insurance companies, and payment processors, and it's expanded well beyond the U.S. Actually have offices in the U.K. as well as Canada, probably other parts of the world. Part of the challenge is firms don't have a threat intel capability, so it's hard to give a lot of meaningful, actionable threat intel back. That's what we do all day long, so it's easy for us. Most of the large banks would have, besides their daily security operations team, they'd have an advanced threat research team, so they too would have those capabilities. So I think the number, the last I heard, was 15% are contributors in FSI-SAC. So that's still good. 15% probably represent higher bias to those more advanced firms. We believe in the mission. If you go back to the antivirus world, all those firms shared a lot more information. The cyber community today is far more competitive and proprietary, but the threat sharing still goes on at a lesser level, but the ISACs are encouraging it. One of the things that I find a challenge, like in an international venue, is the threat actors don't see borders, they just see opportunity. So we should be far more bilateral in terms of that threat sharing. FSI-SAC should be, and in fact is in Canada, what all of our big financial institutions use, among many other feeds. You can get, the FSI-SAC membership, I'm guessing, is something like $20,000 a year, but you can get dedicated feeds from advanced threat intel firms, $500,000 a year. So the big banks can afford that, the small organizations can't. So this does present a bit of a challenge because, in a targeted attack, the small firm could be the vector into the big one.
Question.
I'm Lawrence Carew from the International Energy Partnership. I'm involved. I'm here because of smart grids. Do O's and ones and knock us down. I saw Snowden Saturday night, which is an amazing story if it's all true. But the Guardian was there filming it as he's speaking, telling the story. But anyway, the point is, how can somebody like Yahoo get hacked the other day? I mean, millions of people's information was taken. I mean, this has been going on. These situations have been going on for years. Why haven't they been protected? No, I don't understand. That's for anybody.
Well, that one was years ago, actually.
Yahoo?
Yeah, it was announced recently, but they are dating it back at least a couple of years. Like every firm is we work. Here's an example of Canada working with the U.S. We hired the former 3-star that ran the cyber command at DISA and created hunting teams. He says publicly a $9.4 billion budget and 14,000 staff, and they're hacked continuously. So it's it doesn't matter what you do. You have to sort of get your head into a different frame that you're going to get hacked. So the emphasis nowadays has to be on how do you detect and contain that so it doesn't become a business altering event. This happens in, in the government networks and the House, the Senate. Like, these things happen all the time. The fact that Yahoo's, they probably were not aware of it until perhaps the due diligence in the recent deal. I don't know. That's speculation on my part. But don't be surprised. Like when the Chinese were very upset with the political accusations that journalists had uncovered back, this is probably 4 years ago, where it was alleged that politicians making $30,000 a year shouldn't be driving $250,000 Mercedes. And that was some journalistic work, if you remember, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Aurora hack at Google. So Google has phenomenal resources. Everybody is a victim with a motivated adversary, and so it's a reality. So you have to take a lot more into your own hands in terms of protecting what data you put in there, how you keep it encrypted or not. The best practices, to the Snowden thing, is you encrypt everything at rest. Well, obviously the top, offensive cyber agency in the world didn't. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get all of that. So there's lots to be said there. The power grid, though, I do find I'm an engineer in SCADA. Is how I was trained. That one scares me more than anything. The power grid, smart grids have phenomenal opportunity if done right, but security is actually being baked into. I'm aware of the projects. Some of the biggest ones actually happen in Canada, first British Columbia, and now some of the other provinces. So a lot of the learning was done by the biggest firms in the industry, such as Itron and Schlumberger and so forth. And one thing they have done is used IPv6, which does put a much better level of security. I don't see that becoming the new norm in any time soon. It was going to fix everything 20 years ago, and it still hasn't happened. So there are things, and people very worried about it, things being done and people worried about it, but you're right to be concerned about that. That to me, a couple of electrical engineers and a couple of hackers, morally corrupt, would be able to do significant damage, and that's still true today, unfortunately.
I do want to ask a quick question about cost, because it came up as one of the challenges that small businesses are trying to wrestle with in terms of how much to spend. Is it too expensive? So I'd like to hear from your perspectives what your recommendations, what you say to these small businesses when they say it's too costly. We heard in one of the earlier panels, when it comes to resources, one of the mitigating options are managed security services, right? So outsource some of that. When it comes to cost, what are some of your suggestions or solutions that you recommend?
Well, and this is my personal thought from dealing with a lot of the businesses. I think we're really scaring them by talking about some of the costs. The cost that's really important is the cost that they will have to incur if they don't do the preventive measures, if they don't do the risk assessments, if they don't do the things early, then that's the cost to their business. But they look at, I think what they're looking at is, well, I have to revamp, just from a general perspective, well, I'm going to have to revamp my entire computer system without having the assessment done first. Their costs, each business is different. Each business is, of course, individual. The cost needs to be customized to what's actually needed. But I think, what they're hearing is that, it's going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars from the onset before that assessment is even done. It could cost that. It could cost $500. It could cost $1,000. What we're hoping to do is form another partnership or program with the Small Business Administration to hopefully cover a portion or provide a mechanism to assist small businesses with some of that potential cost if it gets to be exorbitant for some of them. So, I think the cost just depends on what the assessment comes out to be.
Yes, SBA, I like that idea.
Don't tell them I said that.
Did you want to say something? We have a few more questions.
Okay, prevention is cheaper than the correction. It's a good inversion.
Thank you. You had a question? No, right here, right in the front, and then I'll get you in the back. Thanks.
Hi, Quentin Hodgson with MITRE Corporation. First of all, I've tried to make the argument about prevention being much more cost-effective than the cure, but that really is a hard sell, and I think everybody knows that. What I wanted to ask about is when it comes to managed security services, the question of how can you advise people on what to actually expect and what to demand in terms of service levels agreements and so forth, because particularly for small businesses, they may be just looking at, I went and bought something from the store and it came with, you know, such and such security software already preloaded, and I thought that was it. But if you're actually going to advise the small, medium-sized businesses about what kind of levels of agreement that they should be expecting from these, because that can drive the cost, particularly in sort of, I know you're going to say it's got to be a risk profile question, but could you kind of expand on that, I guess, to the two of you?
Yeah, I could start. The term MSSP, Managed Security Service Provider, is very broad. So you've got, there's a whole category in there of what we'd call business process outsourcing, which is just managing the devices, keeping the firewalls, policies current, or making, or patches current and making policy changes, as a simple example. So there's a range for how fast you get notified, and it's how much you spend. And this is, we're a little different. I'll explain that in a second. But basically managing all of the devices that you've acquired from many different suppliers. There's a fee associated with that. If they detect something, you know, they will notify you by the end of the day, or if you pay more, they'll notify you within the hour. So there's, you know, your mileage varies depending on how much you pay. The other side of that is on the threat detection and mitigation, and we have we call it a service level objective. So by definition, your perimeter's been compromised when we get engaged. So you've already been hacked. So it's how fast can we detect and contain it. So we measure that internally. We instrument it. We average about 10 minutes to detect and about 35 seconds on the triage as to whether it's potentially business altering or not. And we've built our whole processes around that. That's far more expensive. The MSSP device management of all levels, we would be, you know, 150% or more of what they would charge. So if you can't manage devices yourself, you need that. Plus you need breach detection that we do. So that's it's a sort of a vague answer, but it costs more. You know, the SLAs on threat detection tend to be different. You work on service level objectives versus service level agreements. And then if we fail on our ability to detect because our devices are down, then, you know, that's service credit territory. That's how it works in managed anything. If you fail to deliver the service, you provide credits back to the customer, and there's all kinds of formulas for that. Does that answer?
I mean, you pointed to time to response and costs, but as a small business, how do I know what makes sense for me, right? So an hour of detection from when the breach happens is obviously better than a day, but how do I know that that's actually valuable to me as a business?
I think it'll depend on who you're doing it for. If you're doing it for yourself, as I was saying earlier, but this will become far clearer over the next couple of years, a lot of the drivers in small business are your big customers. So if you have a bank, a federally regulated bank, asking a law firm to show what their breach detection response capabilities are, and they want to see it within the hour, that'll determine, and so a lot of the driver for small business is coming from the large enterprises, not exclusively, but it is actually switching from cost to top line. You can no longer do business with us if you don't do this. So that actually will start to fill in the blanks. And, you know, I can get up on the soapbox. It's a tax on everything. Because of the scourge that is driving my business to our benefit, it's tax on and it's a flow-through cost. It'll get embedded in everything that we do going forward. Just the way that inventory shrinkage, which is about 1% of retail in the U.S., Cybercrime is actually going to exceed that for the first time towards the end of this year, early next year, and that just gets embedded into everything that we buy. So the amount you have to spend varies on why you're doing it. If you had to, say you're doing something to tick a box, then you go with the minimum. If you actually, were compliant but not necessarily secure, if you need that higher level, then you've got to match it to what your objectives are.
And I think earlier we were mentioning, or earlier I mentioned the DFARS, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, that DoD has put out. A requirement for them is you must report any cyber incident within 72 hours. Okay, so I mean that seems like a long time, but that's just reporting to DoD. So I think I agree with Jay. It's going to have to be at some point a regulatory issue, and at some point an issue based on who you're doing business with. What are their requirements? If you're a supplier, for instance, Boeing Aerospace Support Center has formed a cybersecurity working group with their major primes as well as their suppliers. So they have come up with a 180-point assessment for those who are currently their suppliers and those who want to be their suppliers. So that dictates, if you want to be a supplier to that group, what you need to do and, what it might cost or not cost and things like that.
Thank you. Do we have time for a last question or not? There was a gentleman in the back. Okay. I'm sorry, no? Okay, sorry. Running out of time, but thank you very much for this interactive discussion. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Ola, as well. Really appreciate that fascinating conversation about it. It's something we literally could have gone an entire event on small and medium enterprises and the cybersecurity risks that are there. For our last panel of the morning, I want to welcome up Eric Miller. He's the president of the Rideau Potomac Strategy Group, which is a DC-based advisory group focused on U.S., Canadian, and international government affairs. He's also a non-resident fellow at Stimson's Trade 21 initiative. He's previously been with Business Council of Canada as well as the Canadian Embassy here in DC, which, by the way, is the most beautiful building and location in the city, if you ask me, and as the representative of Industry Canada. So, Eric, please take it away.
So thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. We're the last panel, but we hope it will be an interesting and vibrant event that gives you ample reason to stay. If nothing else, for those of you who are Yahoo users, maybe we will explain what happened. So, cybersecurity really is a human problem. A lot of people get wrapped up in the technology, but it's fundamentally people doing bad things with different sets of tools. And so, it being a human problem, it requires human solutions. One of the challenges that we have in North America is our approach to cooperation has traditionally been one of weak institutions. We have leaders' summits, but we don't have a large standing bureaucracy, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. So we tend to deal with these sorts of issues on an ad hoc basis. And there is a long infrastructure that is in place that has existed between some of the countries, particularly Canada and the U.S. have a long cooperation in this area. They are two of the so-called Five Eyes. Long cooperation in the defense area, even in NORAD with the North American Aerospace Initiative. On the Canada-Mexico and U.S.-Mexico front, there has been less emphasis, but there's a lot of dialogue which is ongoing. And of course, it's not just the government space. You have, of course, government-to-government cooperation, but you also have government-to-private and private-to-private. And so what we want to do in this panel today is to drill down a little bit on where we in North America should be going on this front, how the three countries need to be cooperating on cybersecurity, and how do we deal with those hard issues of institutions, of legal coordination, of regulatory coordination, even in terms of collaboration on the technology front. And of course, we'll ask our esteemed experts, how do you sell to each of the governments, because everybody wants to know on the procurement side as well. And so you have three very different countries, three very different contexts, but we have a great panel here today, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call them up. They're going to give their remarks, then we'll have a little discussion among ourselves, and then we'll throw it over to you. So why don't we start?
I'm just going to sit.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Stand,
Stand, sit. Okay.
Stand up there if you like.
Well, first of all, good morning. My name is Norma Craham. I'm a senior policy advisor and co-chair of the cybersecurity team for Holland & Knight, which is a global law firm. My favorite job, however, was working in the Commerce Department, in the International Trade Administration. I also worked at the State Department, FEMA, and the Department of Transportation. And when I was talking to Adam the other day, I said one of the very first things I worked on when I was at the International Trade Administration was actually trying to get NAFTA passed. So when we talk about trilateral cooperation when it comes to security, cross-border trade in services and goods, these are really important issues. I will say overall, the importance of the North American relationship on cybersecurity, whether it comes from a regulatory regime, from a preparedness, response, and recovery regime, is hugely important. I know we'll talk about cross-border issues in general, but there are also lessons learned a little bit on the physical side as we talk about cross-border issues, cyber crime, cyber espionage, other things. We learned a lot of that post 9/11, and there are interesting examples of that physical and cyber security cooperation that's hugely important. One of the things I do want to talk about, I'm sure we'll get into this throughout the panel, is the issue of international cybersecurity norms, what international rules of engagement mean for cybersecurity, trying to streamline and harmonize what the definition of critical infrastructure really is. We can talk about the massively overlapping and duplicative approaches to data breach, to cybersecurity, to privacy, and there are a lot of restrictions that we're starting to see pop up around the world, just from some very basic building blocks. So I'll stop there and turn it over, but hopefully we'll get into some of these issues in more detail.
Thank you. I'm Eric Rojo. I come from Mexico City, where our companies primarily focus on advising companies and sometimes government in prevention, because that is the primary focus. We go from prevention to continuity of operations, of continuity of business, because they are very well tied together. And I will make a few points, but again, like Norma, I think we would like to engage in discussion rather than a very prolonged presentation. I can speak for 2 hours without stopping, but I don't like to listen to myself. This is the third panel or activity I participated this year in North American integration, which I find very exciting because the political discourse today is pro-NAFTA, against NAFTA, pro-free trade. There are certain things that the train left the station, it cannot be stopped. International trade is here to stay, is going to be forever. Some people may throw a few things in the way, but it can't happen. But supply chain security, the integration of North America for competitiveness, and this is why it's so exciting that 3 times this year, Mexico, Canada, and the United States are together discussing how do we move forward. What's happening to NAFTA? NAFTA has to be addressed in the sense that most of the agreements, particularly for cross-border crossing, have not been implemented. Why? Because the 3 countries have not yet reached all the way down to the operational bureaucracies and make things work the way it was intended. So when you get to the border with your merchandise, things are still very slow. Cargo at risk. Cargo at rest is cargo at risk. Every minute that is stuck at the border costs millions of dollars. We talk about the trade. We still are not trading as a bloc, as a North American bloc. We're still trading as individual countries instead of taking advantage of our joint productivity. But all of that rides on the technical ability to communicate. Cybersecurity, cyber communication, the internet, harmonize policies. And what we discussed in, with the tri-university meeting was precisely how can three governments get together with the private sector. We're talking about private sector government cooperation, although it reminds me the story of the two greatest lies in the world is when you arrive and says, I'm here, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, and the other person answers, oh, I'm very glad to see you. But the thing that we address from the private sector is government does not have all the answers. It cannot have all the answers. We cannot depend on government. The only way the infrastructure is going to be properly protected, is going to function efficiently, the only way the borders are going to work on the sense of commerce is by the private sector investing alongside with government and not waiting for government to invest. Today, the U.S.-Mexico border needs $4 billion of infrastructure investment to improve our commerce. And the Canadian side is not much better. So as long as we continue to wait for government to do something, it's going to be very expensive, it's going to be very slow. And what we want to do precisely is to improve commerce, to improve infrastructure, to improve protection. And at the end of the day, one of the most important things I say, and I will repeat it again, is what we don't know is more important than what we know. Because we really, as fancy as it is, are just at the beginning of the era of information technology, and the question marks is what we're discussing. How do we protect? How do we prosecute? That requires research, that requires investment, that requires a lot of activity, not passivity. And I'll end with that.
We'll pass it to our friends with the pin at BlackBerry.
Jim Wilson here from BlackBerry. And I'm a creature of Washington. I had worked here for most of my professional career, Department of Justice, private sector, doing investigations for Congress. And I'd say the greatest job I ever had was the day that I turned in my BlackBerry, because I did have a BlackBerry, and got on a small sailboat with my family and spent 4 years sailing around the world. That was about 6 years ago. And the thing that came from that, not a lot of professional development in this field, but the thing that came from that was perspective and the extraordinary change from 6 years ago to to a couple of years ago when I came back is sort of beyond comprehension. If you're in this space and you every day read the Wall Street Journal or take your pick of newspapers, you're exposed to such an extraordinary story of emergence of new forms of crime, new forms of penetration of our market space, that you become somewhat anesthetized to it. And being away for so long allowed the perspective of something that really was quite extraordinary, and that the one observation, the personal observation that I come away with, I'm still quite astounded with all of the talk and the money and the importance attached to cybersecurity issues, how unimportant individuals find the subject, how they don't do what they're told, how they don't use the money that's spent on their behalf, how they don't follow the policies of whatever their business is, and how they jeopardize their countries. It was and companies. It was exactly that way when I left, of course. People didn't really pay attention to what they were supposed to do. And it seems to be more or less exactly the same now, with some minor exceptions. So I come from a company that used to be nothing but devices and a network, and it was a company where I dare say practically everybody in this room at one point had a BlackBerry, and it's probably fair to say that at this point not many of you or any of you might still use BlackBerry. So you think, okay, that's gone completely. It isn't. It's still a major part of government space. But our company has changed almost, not entirely, because devices are still a significant part of the business, still used by 16 of the 20 G20 countries, still a major part of a lot of significant government spaces. But we've changed to become a software company where we have so many different technologies, none of which I would again dare say you have ever heard. For example, we bought a company last year for a fairly large sum of money that delivers what we consider to be the most secure voice product in the world. So if you're making a phone call, A to B, your conversation's protected. And as we read all of the articles that we're reading now in the papers, everybody's thinking about emails and Jennifer Lawrence and photos and that sort of thing, but you don't see a lot of talk about voice communications, which are obviously just as important as documents at rest or emails in transit or text messages in transit. So the company has changed dramatically. It's got the largest share of the software market for protection of enterprise mobility. So no longer matters to us whether it's BlackBerry or not, in that we protect products that we protect technologies, for example, on an iPhone or a Samsung, it doesn't really matter. So as things sort of develop for our company, it's becoming more and more important that there is a sort of a common sense approach to supply chains, because so much of what we have goes into various supply chains. So redundant process and duplicative bureaucracy, like every other company, is critically important to us. And it's critically important to us to pay attention to what's happening in global economy, because our products are sold in the majority of countries in the world. So when there isn't a regularization of regulatory process or legal process or border crossing process, or take your pick, then it is phenomenally expensive and problematic for us. So I think any question that might be asked, the answer that will probably creep into whatever I say will have something to do with, stakeholder partnership with government to try and bring some degree of order to the chaos. And the strange thing is, before I came to do this, I called a number of people in the company who deal with process, and I was expecting, I asked them, the question was, can you give me all of your horror stories to tell me all of the things that can be improved? And the good thing was, very few people had dramatic stories of bureaucratic chaos. And that was somewhat affirming, in that that's the sort of thing, when I was at the Department of Justice, you were always hearing stories of nightmare bureaucracy. And there isn't so much in that. But I am hearing that as the pendulum swings, for example, a huge cybersecurity issue, Yahoo a couple days ago, maybe one of us will offer an opinion or know why it took 2 years to tell people what had happened, why Verizon didn't even seem to know what had happened after they were committing a lot of money to that transaction. Things like that come out, and as we will soon see, the Senate and the House will have hearings, and there will be draconian proposals. And so one of the things that is a concern for us is the pendulum will swing too far one way, and I think the way is, for the future, the sort of draconian process way. It's not going to swing back the other way too far. But that's the sort of thing that is of concern to a company like ours, and I'll turn it back over.
So there's a lot in there. Norma, why don't we start with you? You mentioned something that I think is crucially important, which is a common definition of critical infrastructure. Now, certainly if you are deemed to be critical, that implies certain obligations, and that implies certain liabilities, and that implies certain reporting requirements. What is your definition, or what would you do to get to a better understanding of what is critical? And then how do you deal with the liability questions and regulatory questions and reporting issues that come from that, specifically within the North American space?
Sure. When we talk about the definition of critical infrastructure, certainly the first executive order in 2013 laid out those sectors, although we certainly laid those out right after 9/11. So we talk about the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. I do like to affectionately add 2 more. One is the retail hospitality sector, only because it's such a large sector. And then the second one I'd like to add is anyone who's a publicly traded company. Now, there are different reasons for that. I do think the executive order did try and lay out what we call the most critical of critical infrastructure. So certainly within each sector, they have different potential impacts if there is a massive cybersecurity attack, and I think that makes sense. The sub to that, though, is you have to understand the nexus between all of these sectors and where they go together. Now, that may not mean everybody becomes the most critical of critical, but when we talk about cross-sector cascading risk, it's important to understand where all of those fit. So if you look at one sector like the transportation sector, there are multiple modes of transportation that we worry about: aviation, maritime, and you think about even the automotive sector may argue, I think does argue, that they're not critical infrastructure. So I think people have to understand where their risk is and then what that impact is to the economy, and that's what our executive order, I thought, did a good job on. Catastrophic loss of life, impacts of national and economic security. Those are important things. Now, around the world, if you look at what the EU has done when it comes to what is the most critical of critical and what would require reporting, they have a different standard. The thing at the end of the day is we have global companies who are not understanding where they fit and what that means. And we're never going to convince whether it's Canada and Mexico don't have to agree 100% with what we think is critical infrastructure, but I bet there's more similarities there than not.
Well, you also have the challenge that the electric grids and so on are interconnected, and particularly with Mexico's energy reforms, you will get more interconnection between Mexico and, say, the Texas grid, which implies a need for greater standards.
I think that's right, because you were talking about mutual aid too between the energy sector, between US, Canada, and Mexico, and that's hugely important. So we could take an approach that says if you're North America, you need to understand what a different standard may be for critical infrastructure, but for global corporations, you need to take a look at that. Having different reporting requirements, whether it's a data breach issue or just your critical infrastructure in the NIS directive in the EU, for instance, is hugely challenging. To your point, if you're noted as being the most critical of critical, in the United States we call that a Section 9 company now based on that first executive order. You do have liability as a company if you're being told you are in that section. Now, for a lot of heavily regulated sectors like the financial services sector, we have a term SIFI, systemically important financial institution. If you have some of those existing definitions in your daily life, then you understand where that liability lives.
So, Eric, from a Mexico perspective, you have within North America, between Canada and the U.S., a long-standing cooperation. The Five Eyes goes back to the 1940s. NORAD goes back to 1958. But there's certainly been some voices in the U.S. and in Canada that have called for bringing Mexico into the NORAD framework, for example. What sort of framework do we need for the 21st century that would be genuinely trilateral on the cyber front?
Well, a very interesting question, because it has its foundation actually in the historic relationship between Mexico and the United States, going back to the War of 1847, where the United States acquired over half of Mexican territory. Americans don't know, don't care, nobody tells where this territory came from. Mexicans don't forget. So that creates a barrier that, since NAFTA, it has been broken down. I think the general attitude of Mexicans today is more friendly, more business-like, more learning towards the relationship between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Canada is still a little bit of a reluctant partner. Canada has shown a preferred interest to just deal with the U.S. and as minimum as possible with Mexico. Of course, BlackBerry is an exception, Bombardier is an exception. There are some bright spots in the Mexican-Canadian relationship. But going back to the fence, I've seen a couple of changes that are very interesting. The Mexican military, the Mexican police is today college educated, just like our defense and our police here are, so they can talk to each other as equals. Therefore, both governments or three governments can also begin to deal in an equal way. And Mexico may begin to look at joint defense in addition to joint commerce. I think we're getting a little bit ahead ahead of the game. I may want to ask my Mexican colleague from the police how he feels about it, because after 9/11, when the North American Defense Command was created, I was in Veracruz giving a lecture on anti-corruption, but the press asked, is this an effort to invade Mexico again? I said, no, it is an effort to protect the continent. And while Mexico is not a NATO ally, there is no specific alliance other than the Inter-American Defense Board here in Washington that very few people pay attention to, and there is an agreement for common defense. The North American Defense Command was strictly intended to look at the region. Now there is a greater, quieter cooperation between the Mexican military, the Mexican intelligence agencies, the Mexican police, and the different, the FBI, the CIA, and the different aspects that is not today's subject. But we're slowly getting there. But I think commerce is the most important driver. And as long as commerce continues to grow, will continue to be integrated, the government in this case will come along.
Jim, you mentioned the Yahoo breach, and I won't ask you, as a former Verizon person, I won't ask you for a specific comment on that. But it does raise the question of how one deals with state actors, because this was alleged that this was a state actor. And certainly Canada, the US, and Mexico are very close allies. One would think there needs to be coordination and cooperation in looking at the forensics on cases like this. But from your perspective, working for a global company, but one with deep legal experience in the US, how should we be approaching the challenge of dealing with state actors? Certainly China, Russia have been frequently mentioned, but it's a big world, and it doesn't mean they are the only ones who will engage in this. But what are the parameters that the leaders, the Prime Minister Trudeau and President Peña Nieto and President Obama and their successors should be looking at in terms of dealing with the vexing problem of state actors?
It's always good to be asked that unanswerable question, because I don't think there is an answer to that right now. And on Yahoo, I wish I knew. I'm really excited to find out what the answer is to all of the obvious questions that come up. Just before I get into the answer, just playing off of the forms of cooperation that are so meaningful for developing a response, for example, to state actor, state bad actor issues, or issues of that sort. It's interesting to watch the forms of cooperation that are necessary for a company like ours. For example, in the lawful access area, where through devices and networks and communications, we have access to information that we are required to and do contribute in the lawful access situation. You know, there's a very long-standing and positive cooperation between Canada and Mexico, Canada and the United States, all of the different law enforcement agencies. And that positive historical reality is the type of thing that I can see being very beneficial as we move forward, given that we don't fully understand what's happening right now. We have suspicions, we have some good information, some intelligence, but we don't actually know everything that's going on right now with some of the state actor issues that are in play at this point. But we do have, in this area, a history of very positive cooperation between governments. And I see that continuing. I see that continuing on a research and development front, a communication front, where we're talking about the types of issues that have been problematic for us being, for example, with BlackBerry, or for us being, for example, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in dealing with the FBI or Mexican law enforcement. And I think there is this sort of positive history that will leverage forward to help address the problems that we're facing. But it's the same. The answer will be the same answer, I think, is for the inefficiencies in the private sector, which is this need for meaningful, ongoing, robust cooperation between the governments, which I think we're getting. And I think the important part of this is that the private sector has to buy in completely to addressing the problems that we're facing right now. And I think the good news is, notwithstanding a lot of back and forth over issues like encryption and what's going with Apple and San Bernardino and a lot of touch points there, there is indication that there is a community of purpose to try and address some of the problems that we're facing.
Good. Why don't we go to the audience and take some questions? Mike is coming. It's being recorded, so.
Rick Weber at Inside Cybersecurity. So we talk about supply chain risks. Could the panelists talk about things like regulation, procurement regulation? How does that fit into supply chain risks? And what's happening in that area?
Why don't we start with you on that?
Certainly, the regulatory approach on supply chain risk is starting to vary in the U.S. We do have embedded into current law specific requirements for anyone who's a government contractor on the civilian side who are doing business with Commerce Department and a number of other agencies to actually look at their physical supply chain and then certify to the federal government agency that that is secure. That's been we like to say snuck into a number of appropriations bills over the last few years. We have a whole separate regime on the defense side under the DFARS for physical supply chain issues. One of the things we would like to see, I think, again, globally, is some commonality in that. Now, at least in the United States, I think the discussion is simply taking the DFARS requirements for supply chain and just making it apply to all civilian agencies. Some people may say that that is an extreme. Some may say that may be the easiest approach. When you think about supply chain as well, we should also look at the physical side where there are lessons learned. Right after 9/11, we created the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, or CTPAT. Again, that was more in physical security. But there were some interesting discussions in CTPAT about companies who are all using the same suppliers to come up with a common regime for reviewing systems and structures for security. So that way all of the companies could benefit from that. Instead of having to do 50 different assessments of suppliers, that could be very helpful. From a global perspective, I think that's going to be much, much harder.
So should we be starting to work on this in North America? I mean, part of where this discussion comes from is from the North American Leaders Declaration. And so would you say this is something that the leaders ought to have on their agenda for the next summit?
I think they absolutely do. That's something that would be hugely helpful for those doing cross-border trade and have been for some time. You could look at it under NAFTA. You could do it as a cooperative agreement. Certainly when we think about other things that impact not just, well, certainly Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., but WASSNR. We've talked about export controls issues. Well, those were created certainly for weapons of mass destruction. The export of intrusion and surveillance equipment is a huge challenge and a problem. So starting with North America would be a huge first step, and then we could take that around the world.
Great. Other questions? No? Yeah, it is an easy group. So, okay.
Thank you. David Messer with the Information Technology Association of Canada. Thinking about, integrating policy and harmonizing across North America is one really great thing. Europe is kind of going another way all on its own, very separately. Is there a risk that if, as a continent, we harmonize in one way, they harmonize in another way, that will just divide the internet pretty strongly? And then, not to mention China and all sorts of other places building internet fragmentation. So I'm just sort of thinking, what are the international forums that you see to go beyond North America, to bridge and create much more common global standards for cybersecurity?
Who would like to address this easy question?
Let me pick up on something that Norma said and try to address that, because I think we have not talked with North America more about CTPAT, because CTPAT is creating a standard. It begins when we became a very protective country because of security, and U.S. Customs became Homeland Security. That basically it was a police force. Now we're going back to being commerce-oriented, and CTPAT, while it's intended to prevent weapons of mass destruction and other things to come into the U.S. and contraband, it really is one of the mechanisms of supply chain promotion. Why? Because with the initiative of the 21st century border, the effort, and again, this goes back to using electronic media and harmonized e-forms to be able to get the merchandise electronically across the borders between all three countries before it leaves the site, that it is inspected and cleared before it leaves the site, so it can just zoom almost through the border, because in addition to Homeland Security, the U.S. has 21 other agencies waiting to inspect and approve whatever it is. So there's still a long way to go, but CTPAT has been expanded to Asia. It can be expanded to Europe. So if we look at this government effort, as long as the private sector cooperates and works, it goes to saving time, money, identifying critical infrastructure, because again, from our experience, critical infrastructure more often than not is something little, something that nobody sees. We think that critical infrastructure is big. No, critical infrastructure is just that one little thing that makes things work or don't work. So a huge aircraft carrier or the whole Air Force fleet and or our fleet of commercial airplanes can't be grounded because there's the lack of a certain additive that goes into the fuel or into the lubricants. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration into the supply chain, into the critical infrastructure. North America should be the model precisely with the World Trade Organization to harmonize and facilitate commerce, and at the same time go back to government, private sector cooperation to provide for prevention and security.
So, but to this core question, though, that was raised about dividing the internet, and if North America is creating its own universe, Europe's creating its own universe. Moderator prerogative, I think the Europeans are well ahead in creating their own universe, whether we do anything or not. Yeah. So, but, Jim.
Well, just to circle back and agree completely with my two co-panelists, something like CTPAT is extraordinarily positive for a company like ours. And whether it's that, or we have a senior executive who's recently been part of setting up the DSEC process, which applies specifically to medical devices and very specifically to diabetes devices. And it is a risk-based, stakeholder-driven process that moves away, and I think this is the critical part for us, moves away from the old theory of a government-mandated process that is to be conformed with, and is driven more by the private sector in conjunction, in cooperation with the government. But that sort of the critical input of stakeholders is what we see to be the most meaningful part of this process, and wherever we can push that, we find that to be advantageous. And our hope springs eternal, of course, but our hope is that the more cooperation, the more comedy one can sort of put into North America, that we will be able to export and convince people elsewhere that the same sort of risk-based, stakeholder-driven process is a good model, as opposed to the old style, here's some forms, fill them out, and this comes from the government on high, and this is what you have to do. That's what we sort of rail against the most, because that's where we see the sort of the most money being spent for the least assurance.
So, go ahead.
Maybe just to go back to your question, what I would say is we need to be looking at multilateral forums to have these discussions. So we've looked at them a little bit in the G7 and the G20 with the recent communique that nation states should not be using cybersecurity for economic espionage, but we are looking at TPP and TTIP. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not going to get to immediate global harmonization, and the EU is farther ahead But I do think there are other countries around the world who are struggling with what the EU is proposing and trying to come up with different ways to deal with that. But we also have to come up with a common terms that we want to use: information technology, cross-border trade and services. Maybe it's all over, because in international trade negotiations, you have to check five different chapters to get at your answer. But I think more folks in the private sector need to come together and say, let's come up with some common norms, and we're going to take them to our member countries to get them to come to agreement.
Hi, I'm Jack Rapansky, unaffiliated. Is there much executive level awareness about the SCADA and Internet of Things and process control, all that infrastructure level stuff, or is that still kind of under the radar and still a huge risk?
For those who don't know, SCADA is a system that controls our infrastructure and the electrical grid and the gas lines and the different things that move fuel. And there are the automatic control systems. They can be done by hand. They can be done electronically today. And the question goes to, where are we in terms of being able to operate and protect? I think today we're...
How much is the awareness at the most senior levels?
I'm sorry?
How much are the most senior levels aware of the challenge?
If I were to take a guess, very limited. You know, outside... No, it's true. That's the reason I took a second to explain more or less what SCADA is, otherwise we don't know what we're talking about. And so it is one of those things that is critical infrastructure, but senior level officials, maybe outside the Department of Energy, hopefully in the Department of Commerce, understand. Industry does understand what it is and what the challenge is. And of course, we have so many millions of lines of electricity, gas, moving throughout the world, moving throughout North America. We have to be able to depend on these, we'll call them little valves, that simply control the flow of the electrons or the gas or the gasoline or the crude oil. If there's an accident, they shut down the system to prevent great spills. And of course, we're depending that they are automated, and the automation goes down through the internet. And if we don't do the internet, then we're going to have to create great employment of people. They're going to have to be sitting the old-fashioned way, like in a caboose, running the SCADA, but still somebody has to communicate with them, either to tell them what to do, what not to do, or if something happens, they have to do an alert. So again, it's a great challenge. It's a risk that we have to take, and we're taking today. And of course, any form of protection for hacking, because I think it was in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times yesterday, precisely the thought of how a cyber attack can disrupt our energy grid.
So I wanted to drill down on this question a little bit and say, Norma, so how do you explain highly technical phenomenon to really busy people? I mean, I worked for an association of CEOs for 3 years, and the busiest, the most valuable asset that a CEO has is time. So how do you explain highly technical, complex issues that are critically important to the operation of their company, but they don't know the first thing that you're talking about from a technical perspective?
That is a fantastic question. I have decided to call myself the board whisperer, because when you're trying to explain these issues to the board, you have to basically take, as you said, very complex issues and boil them down. If you boil them down into a few areas, when you talk about enterprise risk management and where cyber fits, if you talk about what the impact to the corporation is, and sometimes you have to explain cybersecurity to the CEO like you do to everyone else, which is about people, processes, and technologies. And at the end of the day, what the board and the CEO wants to understand is, what do they need to know, what is the risk, and what needs to be done in not gobbledygook. I will say, between the release of the NIST framework, which specifically calls out the role for CEOs, if you talk about what the SEC is doing, you talk about their shareholder risk, and then at the end of the day, if I talk about their personal risk, if we tell them that their D&O liability insurance might not cover cybersecurity, it's sort of the, it's the...
You give them a picture of the former Target CEO?
We do have a picture at the end, right, exactly. We pulled that out at the end. It's the perfect storm, but give them the basics. Apply cybersecurity to their corporation for risk as you do with everything else, and that's something they can understand.
We have time for one more question. Sir in the back.
Yes, Tony Collins, Phoenix Sequence. You said you were mentioning that government can't do it alone. So how do startups or private sector contribute to the cybersecurity element to help combat back? Is there a program that like private sector can get on board and it's more of communication with them and the government sector?
So Jim, you work with a lot of startups. How do you, what's the way to bring the next generation of great cyber innovators who are small companies working fairly isolated? How do you bring them into the mainstream of providing their ideas and their tools? What's the role for government in that, and what's the role for great companies like yours?
Well, I think there is a lot of dialogue already. I mean, there's an awful lot of cooperation and coordination in this space. I'll put in, changing this a little bit, I'll put in a plug for something that I've been involved in recently that I found to be quite extraordinarily helpful. At the behest of our CEO, I'm sitting in as his representative on a Robocall task force. Robocalls are probably the reason none of you answer your telephones anymore. You pick up the phone, it's not your sibling, your child, or somebody you want to talk to, it's somebody telling you you owe money, or take your pick. And it's the FCC gets more complaints about robocalls than anything else, and the FCC chairman is sick of this, and everybody's sick of this. And so he decided to have a task force. Well, Washington's filled with task forces that go on forever and do something somewhere in the future. And this was quite extraordinary, where in this particular case, CEO of one of the large telecom companies was asked to run the task force, and they set a 2-month timeline. Industry participation, 2 meetings a week, 7 weeks out, work's done, come together and offer responses. I'm sort of turning your question into the bigger picture, where issues like those that we're talking about right now, whether they're border issues or certification issues or whatever, we sort of all know what we think. You just don't want things to languish for a year. So this sort of tight turnaround, really focused type of approach I found to be quite extraordinary, and that it's generated some real ideas, and something has to happen quickly. So that's good. But I think to sort of go back to your question, in your space there is a lot of dialogue, and it's, for example, in our case, it's in our interest. We're talking all the time, trying to bring new things in, because competition is so significant, so severe, that you don't want to miss any good idea or any way of bringing something into the fold of your company and keeping it away from someone else.
Right. So I think I'm being given the yank. So if our panelists have 30 seconds of closing thoughts that they'd like to offer, I'm pleased to offer it to them. Otherwise, we will call it a lunch. Very good.
No, I do have something to say. Okay. No matter how sophisticated we are, no matter how much money we spend, we can never forget the biggest cyber enemy is in-house, the insider. That's the one thing we have to do, our first line of protection, because no matter how much we spend from what's coming in from the outside, if we don't protect what's at home, we're in trouble.
And I suppose that's an endorsement for the Snowden movie, but I'm not sure.
I'll just say the last piece of advice I have for all companies is to look at your both, again, physical and cyber supply chain. You need to understand and map where your risk is, and understand what you would do if whether that the supplier that you have completely goes down or they bring down your network. When we talk about cascading risk, that also means in your supply chain, and you should be very clear in wanting to help small and medium-sized businesses that you rely on. At the end of the day, you are only as strong as your weakest link, and you could have a single point of failure and not even understand it. So while you would look at this through your contracts and other things, it's about understanding what your enterprise is. And at the end of the day, even if it's in your contracts, you rely on a small company, I guarantee you, you're not going to recoup 100% of risk if that small company goes down. Try and help those in your system and your network because it helps them and it's going to help you at the end of the day.
Thank you, Norma, Eric, and Jim, for a great panel, and we bid you good day.
Thanks again to all of our panelists today and our moderators, and also to all of you for joining us here. The New America's Cybersecurity Initiative really appreciates it, the really great dialogue, and we look forward to having you guys tomorrow for the morning event if you feel like getting up for an 8:30 event. But again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.